Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku took on the Chaos King Part 2. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see Part 3, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. So let's start the video. 𝗂𝐴𝐵 felt her heart leap into her throat when she saw the rolling tidal wave of cement. She was getting close to the escape gate that would have ended the exam when she saw it. 𝗬𝗪𝗧, the pro hero that decimated 𝐬𝗨 and Kirishima the previous year, was the villain team's enforcer, and he was probably the worst possible scenario. He stood in front of the gate, creating a wall in front of the opening. Once 𝗬𝗪𝗧 sealed it, the foe enforcer smiled and pressed his hands onto the ground. The 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐫 hostages all froze as the wave approached them. 𝗂𝐴𝐵 dove to President Match and knocked it away, causing the others to follow suit. As the wave passed them by, the stealth hero breathed a sigh of relief. A relief that was short-lived when 𝗬𝗪𝗧 rose to his feet. Besides his standard hero outfit, he also wore the bracers that 𝗬𝗪𝗧 designed to slow him down the previous year. An accessory seemed pointless against a hero who didn't do much movement when his quirk could be activated by touching the ground. "You are a capable hero, my invisible friend, but I'm afraid that I'll be reclaiming the president and prime minister," he announced. He approached the group with his fists clenched and a focused look in his eyes. 𝗂𝐵 needed to move fast. She pressed a hand on the shoulder of the president 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐶D. "Get to cover. I'll handle him. He is mighty. Will you be okay?" the Mech asked her. "I know you probably can't see it, but I'm giving you a thumbs up and winking. Don't worry about me, okay?" The Mech nodded and motioned for the other Mechs to run. "Thank you, hero. And yes, I can see you." 𝗂𝐵 sighed as President 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐶D ran off. "Right. Thermal sensors," she muttered. 𝗬𝗪𝗧 watched them all run away and knelt to the ground. "You can't save them, hero." His quirk activated, sending a wave of concrete at the Mechs. 𝗂𝐵 didn't respond to his comment as she ran toward the foe enforcer and punched him in the face, breaking his concentration on his quirk. A few punches were enough to knock him back, disconnecting him from his source of power. He raised his arms, blocking a few more strikes from the stealth hero. While the two fought, 𝗂𝗲 burst through the rear door of the hideout and saw 𝗬𝗪𝗧 blocking invisible blows. She smiled as she rushed onto the scene with her bat and her earlobes ready to subdue her. The foe enforcer backed away from 𝗂𝐵 just in time for a pair of 𝗂𝗲's earphone jacks to appear suddenly. The stealth hero dodged them as she moved back, allowing her more space to disappear. The foe villain retracted her jacks and rushed into where she thought 𝗂𝐵 was, and started swinging her bat. Thankfully, 𝗂𝐵 gained enough ground to where she wasn't in immediate danger, but her maneuver came at a cost. Without 𝗂𝐵's invisible attacks to stop him, 𝗬𝗪𝗧 eyed the building the 𝗂𝐽𝐽𝐶Ds were hiding in and pressed his hands on the ground. She nearly shrieked before she ran back in to stop him. She slipped by 𝗂𝗲, who had now jammed her jack into the ground to find her, and ran another punch across the enforcer's face. Only this time, however, he toughed out the strike and focused on the task at hand. Desperate, 𝗂𝐵 continued to fire more punches at the enforcer, but he was unmovable now. He hardly flinched as the wave of cement inched closer to the building where the 𝗂𝐽𝐽𝐶Ds were. 𝗂𝗲 finally perked up and turned on her heel, ready to end the fight by stopping 𝗂𝐵. But before she could act and before he could destroy the building, 𝗬𝗨 came rushing in from the air. With the wire arrows jammed into the ground beside 𝗬𝗪𝗧, he let out a war cry as he came in and slammed into the enforcer, adding his whole body weight and his heightened power into the crash. Unlike before, the enforcer couldn't brush off this attack. The force sent dust and pieces of the street into the air, knocking back 𝗂𝗲 and 𝗂𝐵 in the process. When the dust settled, 𝗂𝗲 was the first on her feet. With her bat in hand, she watched the smoke, waiting for someone to come out. Before she could jam her jacks into the ground, she saw a large shadow charge at her. With a second to spare, 𝗂𝗲 fired her jacks at the shadow and stunned the charging shadow. It turned out to be 𝗬𝗨 as he tried to subdue her as well. The jacks jammed into his collar and sent a shockwave throughout his body. He fell forward limp, skidding to the ground right in front of her. 𝗂𝗲's eyes were wide, and her heart was racing as 𝗬𝗨 laid there, groaning from the sudden attack. She was about to congratulate herself when she remembered that there was still an invisible hero to take care of. Raising her bat into a defensive position, she circled the area. She would jam her jacks into the ground to look for a sound. However, she would only hear two heartbeats, 𝗬𝗪𝗧 and 𝗬𝗨. She would remove the jack occasionally before replacing it. The number of heartbeats would remain the same. While she searched, 𝗬𝗨 slowly started to pick himself off the ground. He shook his head and looked up to see 𝗂𝗲 circling the area. He smiled and reached for his pocket. Grasping his phone, he set the volume at its highest and pressed it onto the ground. 𝗂𝗲 jammed her jack into the ground once more. Her eyes widened as she heard 3 heartbeats, and one of them was growing stronger than the others. Her eyes widened as 𝗬𝗨's phone sounded its annoyingly loud alarm. Being the classic sound of a blaring alarm, The sound was what he used to let him know when his cakes and other pastries were done if he was distracted. Gyro's quirk heightened the sound she was receiving, nearly sending her back. 𝐒𝐻𝐿 charged in and landed a solid punch into Gyro's core with a window open, knocking the air from her lungs. She doubled over and fell to the ground, groaning at her friend's strength. 𝗧𝗨 smiled as he strained to pick himself up, only to be assisted by an invisible crutch that was his partner. 𝐒𝐻𝐿 slapped 𝗧𝗨's back. "Thanks for the opening," she said. He chuckled. "How come she didn't hear you?" 𝗬𝗏𝗧. "I was as close to him as I could, so it sounded like there were only 2 heartbeats instead of 3, she said. "A little trick I nabbed from Midoriya's notebook a few weeks ago." 𝗧𝗨 started laughing as he stood up. "You took his notebook?" "I just skimmed through it. Honestly, he needs a better hiding spot for it. A shoebox in his closet isn't good security," she said. Meanwhile, in the hero lounge, Midoriya was talking to Kirishima and Yaoyorozu when he suddenly leaped off of the cushion as a sneeze erupted, startling the 2 young heroes. The everything hero created a small package of tissues and offered them to him. "You alright?" Midoriya groaned. "Yeah, that was weird. Allergies, man?" Kirishima wondered. The young inheritor shrugged. "Maybe I'm coming down with something. Sucks that it's summer, though," he said. Yaoyorozu smiled as Midoriya took some tissues and blew his nose. "You're not skipping sugar time tonight. And I know that. Tea would be good for you instead of training outside again," she said. "When have I ever skipped sugar time?" he wondered. Yaoyorozu smiled and created a notebook. "Let's see here. You've been keeping count." Once the subject was dropped, 𝗧𝗨 grabbed some capture tape and tore some off. Giving it to 𝗂𝐻𝐿, she walked over to 𝗬𝗏𝗧 to bind him. When she approached him, however, he was looking up at her and smiled. "You two did some great work here," he complimented. "Why, you're okay." 𝗬𝗏𝗧 chuckled. "I'm a sturdy man, young one. While young 𝗧𝗨 did catch me by surprise by coming from the air, the attack wasn't enough to fully knock me out. Still, the attack was a great way to progress the battle," he said. He brought his hands to his lower back, and he crossed his legs. "I surrender." With an invisible smile on her face, she tied up the foe enforcer. 𝗧𝗨 sighed in relief as he grabbed 𝗂𝐻𝐿's gloves and boots and passed them to her. "Come and get him." 𝗂𝐻𝐿 chuckled as she took the gloves and boots. "I saw the hostages run into that building. I'll go grab them," she said as she ran off to find them. 𝗧𝗨 sighed heavily as he walked over to tape up Gyro. Picking her up and sitting her upright, he placed her hands behind her back and taped them together. The hearing hero groaned as she shook off the feeling of being overloaded with the ringtone trap earlier. "Tea, that was pretty good." She complimented his surprise. "Got me good." 𝗧𝗨 chuckled. "I honestly thought that wasn't going to work. I thought you would have noticed me getting up and kept me down. You were stunned, so I didn't think I needed to be sure. But now I really should consider body mass into how much power I put into those attacks." The Sweets hero smiled as he lifted Gyro onto her feet. He walked over to 𝗬𝗏𝗧 and helped him up as well. When the foe enforcer was on his feet, 𝗧𝗨 noticed 𝗂𝐻𝐿 returning with. His jaw dropped as he saw them. "Are those QICDs?" Gyro laughed. "Yep. It caught Shoji and me by surprise when we saw them," she said. "I thought Winters destroyed them all as part of her probation or something." 𝗬𝗏𝗧 shook his head. "She was ordered to destroy Project Opus. The quirk identification and combat directive is an excellent training tool and a massive leap from the mannequins we would have had you use," he said. "I think young Winters is controlling them directly with their combat drives disabled." Gyro smiled as President QICD walked up to 𝗧𝗨 and bowed. "You both saved us. Happy day. Well, we need to get out of here. Come on, let's go. The police will be here to take the both of you to custody." 𝗂𝐻𝐿 said. 𝗧𝗨 nodded, and the duo ran off. 𝗂𝐻𝐿 grabbed 3 police cutouts and placed them within sight of the 2 foe villains to simulate their arrest on her way over. With the targets secured, 𝗧𝗨 ran ahead to the obstructed escape gate and leaped into the air with a fist raised. Shouting his war cry, his fist smashed through the concrete obstruction, opening the path for 𝗂𝐻𝐿 and the QICDs. Deku had Shoji over his shoulder on the top of a nearby building as he leaped down to the ground and released Gyro and 𝗬𝗏𝗧. He set the multi-armed hero in training down, allowing him to balance on his own 2 feet. He tousled Gyro's hair and stepped to the side to watch the heroes go. Once they passed through the gate, an alarm sounded off, alerting the hero and villain sides that the first test was complete. Deku fished a small microphone from his belt and turned it on. "The first test is complete. The hero team successfully neutralized all enemies and rescued the hostages via an escape gate. Hero team wins," he called out. Inside the heroes' lounge, the group in there cheered. Once Deku escorted the first team of heroes and villains to the main viewing area, Abigail Winters went to heal Shoji's injuries and relieve 𝗬𝗏𝗧 of some soreness. Her quirk training allowed her to strengthen the healing energy as she transfused it into her patients, effectively speeding up the regeneration process while also enhancing the power in herself. She didn't feel the combined amount of pain as much when she was finished. Once they were done, the symbol of peace led them to the monitoring room. Mr. Aizawa stood in front of the monitors along with Recovery Girl and Principal Nezu. Behind them was a table of food and drinks for the heroes to enjoy, along with several plush chairs like those seen in the separate waiting rooms. Nezu patted the chairs, motioning them to sit. When they did, he beamed. "Congratulations to the 4 of you. You all worked tremendously on this exam and handled it like professionals, save for some colorful language on young Gyro's part," the cute principal said, eyeing the hearing hero. Gyro chuckled as she rubbed the back of her head. "The true nature of this exercise is simply what Deku told you all before. Be prepared for anything. In our line of work, having every single moment and knowing every single detail would make our jobs so much easier. But being a hero is never about being easy. Being a true hero required a lot of hard work and an ability to remain cool under pressure." He turned to Sato and Hagakure. "The 2 of you improved greatly from last year. Utilizing your strengths and treating this as if it were the real deal is very important. Contacting the police and requesting a situation report was not in the requirements for a victory. However, doing so anyway demonstrated just how close we have to work with police and other law enforcement agencies." He turned then to Gyro and Shoji. "You 2 are remarkable heroes. And while your combined powers would have made it difficult for anyone to sneak up on you, you still lost the hostages in the end due to being spread thin. The heroes exploited your division and escaped with the hostages." The 2 nodded. "However, you still managed to give it your best shot. Shoji, you held your own against young Sato here and pinned him against the wall multiple times. Allowing yourself to get distracted, however, was just the window he needed to defeat you. When you're out there on the field and facing villains or criminals, look for the smallest crack in their armor. A precise shot can take down any foe." "Precise, not saying it has to be strong," he said. "And Gyro, you still charged into battle regardless of the forces against you. You did subdue Sato for a moment, however, you let your guard down once more. True villains will try not to make it noticeable in front of heroes. However, they have been known to make some mistakes. And you, Hagakure, not only did you manage to find the villain hideout, but you also concocted a plan to rescue the hostages while they were distracted. Your invisibility gave you the tactical advantage needed to overcome the villains. Sato, you overcame the shortfalls you experienced during your finals last year. You went against the same enemy as before. However, learning from your mistakes is how we learn. Taking the indirect approach, while it may feel dirty, produced results. Your training has paid off." Principal Nezu smiled up at them. "Chins up, everyone. You all completed the first portion of your second year." Gyro eyed Shoji. He nodded and motioned for her to speak. "Yes, sir. We lost the match," she said. Principal Nezu nodded. "We never said this was part of your final grade, did we?" At that moment, Deku came walking into the room. "I don't think we did, but maybe I let it slip." "Not sure," he said. Sato smiled. "Hey Deku, great simulation." He complimented with a thumbs up. "Definitely," Hagakure exclaimed. "It helped us learn a lot," Shoji said. "And the unknowns here made it a refreshing experience," Gyro said. "This happened, huh?" Deku nodded. "One of the first assignments I did with my team. Of course, the simulation pales to the real thing in regards to the villain size and the people in the city panicking and such," he said. The 4 shared a smile. "Congratulations, all of you. Take these lessons with you and build yourself and your friends stronger. I'll let Snipe go further in depth with you all privately. I should get the next groups ready," Deku said as he walked off to the villains' lounge. It took some time, 15 minutes to explain to the villains and choose the next team, and another 30 minutes to answer questions from the heroes' team. Unsurprisingly, Yaoyorozu and Midoriya voiced their opinions on the deception. Knowing that the villains could summon reinforcements made the heroes' job much harder and opened them up to failure while the opposition didn't have to do much. Ada was louder than some of his classmates, while Kirishima wondered if they had been set up to fail. That's when Deku thoroughly explained the severity of their future. Villains don't play fair. They don't listen to the laws that have kept society relatively safe for 2 centuries. They don't care that civilians should be protected. They won't hesitate to use their quirks to make your lives difficult and put others in the crossfire. They can easily grab any random civilians and use them as human shields. You will be placed in situations where they will have a real advantage, he explained. You take away the prospects of fame and fortune, and you get a life or death job. Heroism isn't a 9-to-5 job in case you're not entirely aware. So we are to go into these simulations with no idea who our enemies are, where they are, who their enforcer is, and we're supposed to pass. Ada wondered. Deku nodded. Because you are heroes, I expect you all to win. I expect you to rescue the hostages, beat the villains, and bring them to custody just in time for tea and a rousing game of Guess Who. As professional heroes, you must surpass those expectations and rise beyond the chaos of the world around you. If you can do exactly that and go beyond, then you are heroes, he said. The remaining heroes in the room all muttered amongst themselves. Look, times have changed for the modern hero. There are still those who do work on the side of heroics, like product endorsements, community service, fashion lines, and workout videos so you can have Red Riot ripped abs. Deku looked at Kirishima with an unamused look in his eyes. I'll just tell you this now because when it comes out, my younger self will be nice and say it's a funny line. It's not. It's a stupid gimmick that made me slam my head into a brick wall. Some laughter filled the room as Kirishima felt his face burn up. But heroism is now more focused on the deeds that are performed. The acts of kindness are so small that they never make the news. It is being there for those less fortunate, accompanying a kid or a group of kids to school through rough areas, going after abusive parents, and opening doors for those at risk of being the next Tamura Shigaraki. It's exhausting work. And there are more situations where you cannot pose for the camera before rushing into the battle. You understand me? Multiple heads nodded, earning a relieved sigh from Deku. Good. Now, speaking of Red Riot, you and 𝐂𝐴jiro are going next. Your villains must have had ample time to prepare, so I'll ask them to wait before I start the match. Go up the stairs. And 𝗵𝗃 will give you your support items, okay? The two heroes rose and nodded simultaneously. Yes, sir. Deku smiled. Good. Just know that your colleagues are now your audience. Previous teams will spectate and offer their criticism as the battle commences. Best of luck to the both of you, he said. Deku turned to walk out of the room with a smile on his face. He passed 𝗵𝗃 and tousled her hair before blasting off into the air. He floated in the air for a moment before he found his vantage point, a somewhat tall building with a great view of the villain base. He landed on the roof and smiled as he focused on the building and the open window. Thanks to enhanced senses, he could see the two villains pacing and hear them talking amongst themselves. He raised the mini microphone to his lips. The second round will commence in 5 minutes. When Deku left the room with Kirishima and 𝗂𝐴jiro behind him, Midoriya had to marvel at his older self's aura. Not only had he gotten taller and more robust, but he also grew wiser. The Red Riot ripped abs line caught him by surprise. But that only gave him the idea that they still knew each other in the future. His words about villains playing dirty were common knowledge among them. They knew that villains didn't care about civilians, and they didn't care about how the fight should be fought. The rules were nothing to them. They could feign surrender and strike at a moment of weakness. They could use hostages and harm them if needed to do anything they wanted. And he felt it was unfair. It was unfair that the villains could win while the heroes had to play by the rules. Heroes needed to work with the police in keeping the peace. They needed the legal paperwork to raid a hideout and needed clean confessions to be tried in court. He, Ida, and Todoroki were all on the chopping block to fight and injure a villain without permission. Hell, if Aizawa knew precisely what he did to Muscular during the previous summer, he would have been given the boot before he could explain himself. And yet, Deku was here telling them that it was the reality they had to accept. Villains could do whatever they wanted, and heroes could never truly eradicate evil, but his older self sold them all the idea that winning was still possible. They were heroes, damn it, and it came with the territory. Go above and beyond, plus ultra style. Midoriya sighed as he leaned back in his seat. Tokoyami was entertaining himself with a small ball that Yaoyorozu made while she and Ida discussed the deception. Despite his explanation earlier, Ida wasn't satisfied with Deku's actions. Giving the villains a secret trump card was a low blow, almost as if he was sabotaging the hero's team. The inheritors stretched. Today was going to be a long day. And while he felt like he knew everything there was to know about the test, a small part of his brain wondered if Deku still had a secret he wasn't sharing. His thoughts were interrupted when the buzzer sounded, making him jump in place. His face burned red, and he quickly scanned the room. No one had noticed. Thankfully, the second round begins. Good luck, guys. Kirishima and 𝗂𝐴jiro didn't have to look hard for their villain base. As soon as the buzzer sounded and they were allowed to begin, the two heroes felt the earth shake, and a blast of cold air enveloped them. A cloud of icy mist came rushing at them through the buildings, knocking over the cardboard cutouts of police officers and civilians. When the cloud passed them by, 𝗂𝐴jiro shivered and wrapped his tail around his waist. He brushed some of the frosts from it before speaking. Looks like Todoroki is our villain, he said. But why give himself away like that? That's not like him at all, Kirishima wondered. 𝗂𝐴jiro shrugged. We should be careful, though. The last time I faced him, he froze me in place without a second thought. We should approach this with caution, he said. I can break through the ice if he tries it. I may not be as fast as Bakugo when it comes to that, but I can still give it my best, Kirishima said. 𝗂𝐴jiro smiled. Right, let's get going. That blast came from the north, so let's head that way, he said. He unwrapped his tail, slammed it on the ground, and flew through the air. Kirishima sighed and ran after him with his arms hardened. Oh no, don't worry, I'll catch up, he muttered. His musings were heard, of course, by the students and teachers in the command room as well as Deku. Kirishima panted as he passed through the ruined cars in the area and hopped over a few police officers' cardboard cutouts. He picked a few up from the ground and kept moving, though his actions widened the gap between himself and his partner. He passed by a ruined bank where a massive hole could be seen. Police cars were knocked over and officers, 3 cutouts of criminals, evident by their black and white striped sweaters and ski masks, sat against the wall of the building while generic heroes stood around them. This prompted Kirishima to stop for a moment to take a look at the scene. He had to smile. Damn, they put some work into this. It would be awesome if there were robot villains, though, he said. I want to break something. Shaking his head, Kirishima turned and continued running. He bumped into a police cutout and knocked it over. Thankfully, he caught it before it hit the ground. He chuckled and brushed some imaginary dirt from its jacket before running off. It took a few more minutes, especially since the big foe villain was a 2-pointer robot from the entrance exam, and he had to see it hogtied with a hero cutout pointing at it with a smile. But he finally caught up with 𝗓𝗲𝗄. The tailman sighed when his partner caught up. Damn it, he mumbled. Kirishima smirked. Never heard you curse. What's up? He wondered. 𝗓𝗲𝗄 pointed outward. When Kirishima saw what he was gesturing to, his heart stopped. On the other side of a large plaza was the villain hideout. It was evident due to the massive ice wall that encompassed the block it was situated on. Multiple buildings were clumped together and encased in ice. Within the group, a single building stood taller than the rest. Peering out of the window of the final floor was Todoroki with a slight smirk on his face. 𝗓𝗲𝗄 sighed. He's been standing there ever since I got here. I don't understand it. He shouldn't be this open about his location. He said. Unless it's a trick, Kirishima said. He probably wants us to find him to fight. Enclosed spaces are prime places to fight in for him, 𝗓𝗓𝗄 said. I can't fight him in a hallway. Kirishima hardened his arms. But I can. He rushed toward the ice. Raising his hardened fist, he smashed it against the ice, creating a nice hole in the wall. Running on the fires of his manliness, Kirishima fired off rapid punches at the ice, smashing at the very barrier that kept his team from winning the game. Behind him, 𝗓𝗓𝗄 eyed a nearby statue that was pretty close to a section of the ice. He smiled and bounced toward it. With the heroes going off in separate directions, Todoroki smiled and pressed on his communicator. Kirishima is heading your way, he said. On the ground, Mina Ishido smiled and hopped in place. He's going to hate me for this, but this is genius. Handsomeness and intelligence don't usually go together, but for you, Ishido, please. The half-fire, half-ice foe villain pleaded with her. Mina chuckled. I'm kidding. One bad bowl of soup coming up. She smiled and went to work. She ran toward the ice wall and where she knew Kirishima would end up and leaped into the air. Using her quirk, she began skating around the area. With a broad smile on her face, she completed a series of complicated spins and twirls, sending her acid all over the place. As she kept going, she felt the ground beneath her feet start to sink. She fired acid from her hands while skating around. And above her, she saw a hint of red coming toward her. She smiled as she leaped into the air into safety. Her leap was perfectly timed. Once she landed, the final sheet of ice broke, and Kirishima leaped out with his arms raised and a broad smile on his face. Once he saw Ishido, however, his smile faded. The pink foe villain smiled and waved at him. Kirishima looked down to see the pool of acid underneath him. With realization dawning on him, he extended his arms and slammed them into the ice around him, stopping himself from falling into the pool. Mina smiled and fired jets of acid at the ground next to and behind the hardening hero. Content with the amount of acid she produced, she smiled and crossed her arms. Gotcha. Kirishima smirked at her. You're a pain sometimes, you know that. The pink foe villain laughed. Just doing my job. Hang around for a bit, yeah. She leaped away, leaving the hero trapped over the pool. Nearby, Deku smiled as Mina ran off. That's one hero captured by the villain team. 𝗓𝗓𝗄 needs to complete the mission, he muttered to himself. Meanwhile, 𝗓𝗓𝗄 slammed his tail against the statue he had spied earlier and sent it falling against the ice wall. Once it was down, he ran up it and, using his tail, slammed against it and launched into the air. He could see the foe sub shop on the other side with several civilian cutouts knocked over. Once he cleared the wall, he landed on the roof of the shop, brushing the dust off of his gi. He scanned the area and saw the main building where Todoroki was in. He ran toward it and readied his tail to launch into the air. The maneuver would have worked out had Todoroki not shown up. Before he could slam his tail, a blast of fire erupted and blocked 𝗓𝗓𝗄's path. His eyes widened as he skidded to a halt. Turning to the source of the surprise inferno, he saw Todoroki standing there with flames sitting on his entire left side. Going somewhere, he wondered. Yeah, kinda want to save some hostages, you know. Todoroki stepped toward him. I'm afraid I can't let you do that. They'll fetch us a nice amount of cash from the government, he said. 𝗓𝗓𝗄 smiled, fitting into the villain role pretty well. Ha. Well, sorry, bud, but we're winning this, he declared. We who? Myself and Red Riot. By now, he should have broken through your ice wall, dealt with your friend, and gotten the hostages, he said. Todoroki smiled. He raised his hand to his ear communicator and pressed against it. Hey, Pinky, what's the situation with Red Riot? Red Riot is hanging out poolside as we speak. He doesn't look comfortable at all, she responded. The half-fire, half-ice faux villain smiled. Good work, I have Tailman, he said. Ojiro smiled. This won't end like last time. He moved to charge in against his opponent, only to find his feet stuck. Looking down, Ojiro noticed it. His feet were completely encased in ice. He tried moving his tail to no avail. Todoroki froze it in place too. He sighed and dropped his shoulders before raising his hands. I hate you sometimes. Todoroki smiled as he moved in to capture the hero. He grabbed Ojiro's wrists and bonded them with capture tape, ending the match. Midoriya and the rest of the Hero Lounge were surprised when they heard the announcement. The villain team has successfully captured the hero team and defended their hostages. Villain team wins. He turned to his classmates. They were one apiece now. The next group that stepped up to the plate was Koda and Tokoyami as the hero team. Unlike their previous team, Koda acted tactically by calling in a single pigeon before the round started. Once the game began, the petting hero asked it to help in surveying the area. As it flew off, Tokoyami turned to his partner. This was a brilliant idea. We can get the drop on our opponents in no time, he said. Koda nodded. He started to sign. Maybe our villains heard me. We have to work fast. Tokoyami nodded. Good idea. Let's go, he said. Together, they started to run into the city. As they ran, Dark Shadow emerged from Tokoyami and checked all of the nearby buildings. The spectral entity picked up a few knocked-over cutouts while surveying the area, prompting Koda to smile. Are you doing well, Dark Shadow? He signed. Oh yeah, got a solid 4 hours of sleep last night, he said. Only 4. Tokoyami nodded. He didn't do much last night, thankfully. He just wandered around the room before actually going to sleep, he said. Koda smiled. Hugh, I used to be the same way when we moved in, he sighed. I'm not a pet. Dark Shadow shrieked. No, you're not. You're a pain in my neck, Tokoyami commented. You love me. Admit it. No. Koda smiled at their interactions. Dark Shadow returned to Tokoyami, and the three continued on their way, unaware that they were being watched. Koda's pigeon did not return as something important interfered with its return. Standing nearby with a small pile of breadcrumbs next to him was Zero. He watched the three heroes walking along, and he smiled. Froppy, they're coming to you, he called into his communicator. Nearby, Sue appeared from a peach wall that belonged to a faux law office. She stuck onto the wall, and as she watched the heroes pass her, she returned the call. I see them. I'm ready, Ribbit, she responded. She turned invisible once she finished her call. The two heroes walked by the office building when Koda suddenly stopped, prompting Tokoyami to stop as well. Is something wrong, Anima? Koda nodded. He raised a hand to his eye level, scanning the sky for something. Something is wrong, he signed. I haven't heard back from my friend from earlier. The pigeon. That's strange. Something must have happened to it, Tokoyami wondered. Probably saw a car to poop on, Dark Shadow mused. Koda shook his head. They always come back unless they were misled by something. The heroes didn't have time to ponder the situation any further. In an instant, they were attacked by Tsu as she leaped from her hiding place and shot her tongue out to grapple onto a streetlight over them. Dark Shadow didn't have time to warn Tokoyami as the rainy season faux villain struck by slamming into his back. The surprise attack sent the jet black hero to the ground, landing in a thud. Koda and Dark Shadow watched Tsu land in the middle of them. Sorry, Tokoyami, but you needed to go down first, she said. She turned to Koda. Sorry about this, Koda. The petting hero's eyes widened, and he turned behind him. He ducked out of the way as a fast roll of the tape appeared and stuck to the ground. Koda saw Zero rushing in from a rooftop with his helmet's visor down. You won't be rescuing any hostages today, Anima, he called out. Once he landed, he fired another tape shot at the petting hero. However, Koda caught it with ease. Zero's eyes widened underneath his visor as his opponent swung him around several times before letting go, sending the taping faux villain flying through the air. Once he was cleared, Koda turned and dodged a surprise attack from behind by Tsu. Watching the scene unfold, Dark Shadow grabbed Tokoyami's shoulders. Come on, let's go, he bellowed out. Unfortunately, he couldn't get up. Tokoyami groaned as he eyed his spectral companion. I can't move. Tsu's mucus has paralysis properties. I'm stuck, he reported. His spectral companion sighed heavily as he watched the fight unfold. I can go in and help. Tokoyami groaned and nodded slightly. Dark Shadow launched into the battle and grabbed Tsu by the waist, hoisting her into the air. Koda watched them go into the air and then ran to his fallen partner. Are you hurt? He signed. Tokoyami sighed. I just can't move. I don't know for how long, though. You'll have to get the hostages to safety, he proclaimed. Koda's eyes widened. He looked back at Tsu as she caught herself on a street light. She shook her head from the throw and leaped toward the heroes. Dark Shadow raised his claws, ready to fight. Zero reappeared behind his partner and fired a strand of tape at the heroes. Dark Shadow grabbed Koda and pulled him away as Zero's tape struck the ground. The spectral entity had to move in midair as Tsu's tongue shot out at them. He had no choice but to drop the petting hero onto the street as he moved to attack. Underneath his helmet, 𝗧𝗏 smiled as Dark Shadow charged him. He stuck onto a nearby building and pulled himself away from his opponent's strike using his tape. Dark Shadow swiped at the ground and watched 𝗧𝗏 fly through the air and above 𝗧. She stuck her tongue out and pulled herself toward the entity and swung her leg out, barely missing her target. Dark Shadow increased the distance between them before rushing back in. He swiped at 𝗧 only to be caught by 𝗧𝗏's tape. He swiped with his other one, however. His attack was slower than before. 𝗧 didn't need to struggle much to dodge his attack. She smiled as Dark Shadow appeared tired from his attack. 𝗧𝗏 smiled under his helmet. The two villains had moved out of the way enough for Dark Shadow to be sitting in the near summer sun. The strong sunlight ate away at his power, combined with being far from 𝗧𝗏𝗵𝗲, drained him of every single move. The spectral entity panted heavily as he dropped to the ground and slinked back to 𝗧𝗏𝗵𝗲. Seeing the two worn out, 𝗂𝐴 turned to the foe villains. 𝗧 was fading into the background of the street, and 𝗧𝗏 was perched on a light fixture, waiting for his chance to strike. He didn't like the look of his odds, including the fact that if he tried to sound off to his animal friends, 𝗧𝗏 would be quick to shut him up. He sighed and sucked it in. He raised his hands to his mouth and screamed out, "My winged friends, come and help me take on these villains." That was when 𝗧𝗏 fired off his tape. The sticky attack barely missed 𝗂𝐴 as he ran to the side, continuously screaming into the air. 𝗧 tried using her tongue to capture him to no avail. His screams started to attract the attention of a flock of pigeons that flew overhead. Their appearance didn't go unnoticed by the foe villains. 𝗧 saw the pigeons start to dive bomb them. Cellophane, Froppy vanish. She nodded and leaped aside before disappearing. 𝗧𝗏 continued to fire off his tape against 𝗂𝐴 and got closer to sticking to him. The petting hero leaped over a piece of fallen debris and smiled. He managed to get the job done. 𝗧𝗏 watched as the cloud of pigeons descended upon him. He was swarmed immediately, and firing his tape would not have made the situation easier for the tape foe villain. A smaller cloud stayed behind, searching the streets for 𝗧𝗏. Noticing the pigeons not finding her, 𝗂𝐴 started to panic as he scanned the area. He ran to where he saw her disappear, but she wasn't there when he got there. He turned back to 𝗧𝗏𝗵𝗲 and saw he had captured tape around his wrists. 𝗧 had captured him. He didn't notice her attack until it happened. As he faced his partner, 𝗧 popped up out of nowhere with her tongue hanging out. "Ribbit!" She jumped on his chest, knocking him down to the ground. "Sorry, 𝗂𝐴," she said as she leaped away, leaving behind a small amount of mucus. He tried to get up but found his arms and legs to be unresponsive. His eyes widened as he realized his predicament. The villain team has successfully restrained their heroes and retained control of the hostages. Deku declared, "Villain team wins." The pigeons stopped their harassment of 𝗧𝗏 once the announcement was made. Feathers were left behind and stuck out all over the taping hero. "Yay, we won." He spat out a feather once he said that. Meanwhile, the Chaos King smiled as he watched a semi drive up to the crew's hidden warehouse. It drove through the main gate, rounded a turn, and came to a stop. Some with physical mutations and others looking completely normal. Multiple men and women ran up to the truck and started to unload. They pulled out and carted away unmarked crates and carried them into the warehouse. The Chaos King watched with the flask that contained the former boss's quirk in his hand. He swirled it around, hearing the sloshing of liquid inside. He had been feeling good the past few days, regardless of the knowledge that his enemy was in the same time period as he was. He was ready to grow the Discord Army's power beyond the Paranormal Liberation Front's power. Behind him, a member of the crew ran up to him and saluted. In his resting hand was a small package wrapped in a newspaper. "Boss, we checked the crates as you asked," he said. The Chaos King turned to him. "And it's all there. 250 units of trigger from the factory are in each one. We should have the full order ready for distribution in no time," he said. The Titanic boss smiled and pocketed the flask. "Very good. I'm impressed that they actually lived up to my expectations," he said. "In my other formula." The subordinate handed out the package. They only had time to get a few doses in. It was already tested, and they deemed it ready for immediate use, he said. "And the test subject? Destroyed?" The Chaos King nodded. "As much as I want this time period to experience my perfected serum, too early could change the future. I'm sure the symbol of peace won't mind this little blast from the past," he said. "As symbol of peace, is Endeavor coming for us?" the subordinate asked. The boss laughed. No, Endeavor is no longer the #1 hero where I come from," he said. Then who?" "Young man, here are a few things you need to know. 1. The times have changed in the 12 years between now and my time. 2. The next symbol of peace will hit harder than Endeavor, and I have millions under the Mediterranean to prove it. And 3. When he does come after us, only I and these lovely beasts will be a match against him," the boss explained. The subordinate nodded. "Yes, sir. I have a question. What are these beasts you mention?" Our contacts at the factory didn't elaborate, only saying that it's the end of hero society. he asked. The Chaos King smiled as he unwrapped the package. Inside was a small blue case with the Chaos Star stamped on it. He opened it up, revealing 3 small devices roughly the shape of a palm. He picked one of the devices out from the case and sealed it. He turned to his subordinate, holding the device. "Tell me again what your quirk is," he said. The subordinate's eyes widened. He held his arms up and activated his ability. "I called it the Tesla coil. My body protrudes these small coils from my body, and I can generate an electrical field to protect myself," he said. "No one can get too close, and fighting close quarters is advantageous for me." The Chaos King smiled as the subordinate powered down. At the bottom of the device were 3 plastic caps that would normally be found on hospital-issued syringes. He popped all 3 off and grabbed the subordinate by the arm. "Thanks for the reminder," he said. The subordinate realized it too late. The Chaos King jammed the device into the man's neck and pushed down against it. The subordinate convulsed as the mysterious serum was injected into him. Once the device was empty, the Chaos King threw it away and watched his serum do its thing. The subordinate cried out as he grasped the top of his head. "What did you do, boss?" The Chaos King smiled. "I assured the downfall of heroism." He pushed the subordinate away, watching him transform. A few moments later, his new creation was hauled away and chained up. As the Chaos King watched his crew continue their work, he smiled and breathed in deeply. "Chaos will reign supreme in this world. No symbol of peace will change my fate," he said. "Back at you around 4. Begin." The sound of the horn and the rumble of the gates behind them shutting were signs that it was their time to shine. 𝗳𝗏𝗧𝗏 and 𝐒𝐩𝐢𝐽𝐻 were both standing at the entrance with 𝗧𝗵𝗲's wire arrows at their feet, while the speedster was stretching in place. 𝐒𝐩𝐢𝐽𝐻 sighed as he eyed the sun. "What a wonderful day to shine," he said. 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 chuckled. "I guess you can say that," he said. "You ready?" "Oh, Speedy One, I am always ready to shine bright," his partner exclaimed. The former class rep smiled. "Okay. Our classmates haven't had much luck so far, so we need to up our game. I suggest that I speed through the city to find the villains on foot. You should gather information about what happened here that called us in," he said. "We don't have a lot of time to find the hostages before the villains escape." 𝗂𝐢𝐽𝐻 nodded. "They may be cardboard cutouts, but they are cardboard cutouts that are too stunned by my twinkling to say much. We shall do our very best," he shouted, fisting the air as his declaration echoed through the area. 𝗂𝐴DA nodded and took his running stance. With his engines revved up, he blasted off down the street, leaving 𝗂𝐢𝐽𝐻 in his dust. The shining hero sighed as he eyed the sun. Midoriya got a handle on his power. "I wonder how I'm doing in the future." With the thought passed, 𝗂𝐢𝐽𝐻 ran off down the street. While the hero team is supposed to find the villains and rescue the civilians, it is also their job in dealing with the situations they left behind. While the exam, devised by Deku, was supposed to test their combat and cognitive skills as both heroes and villains, having them respond to the faux situations that made the scene seem real was an unspoken objective. While the hero team surveyed the area, Deku smiled as he watched them work. In front of him were the students that had already gone. "Can anyone tell me what the first thing you do when you get to the scene of a villain attack?" he asked them. Zero raised his hand. "Ooh, look for the villains," he asked. "No, anyone, speak to the officer in charge," Gyro answered. Deku shook his head. "Police haven't arrived yet." "Try again." Todoroki raised his hand. "Talk to the civilians." "Close, but no." "Anyone else?" A moment of silence passed throughout the room before Asui raised her hand. "Check to see if the area is safe." Deku snapped and pointed at her. "That's right. If you arrive at the scene where there was a villain attack, it's important to secure the area. Check for any immediate dangers. Ensure the general population is at a safe distance away from the initial site. Save who is in immediate danger. Basically, Year 1 information," he said. Some of the students nodded. This is something that each group has failed to do. A few hero teams have taken statements from police and picked up toppled-over officers and civilians. However, no one has secured the area of the initial area. "Wait, what about us?" Hagakure asked. "You guys checked in with the local PD after giving an initial assessment of the area. However, that was it. You didn't check to see if the civilians and police were okay. You didn't complete an assessment of the area's safety, and you didn't ensure there were no other villains in the area. Still, kudos for checking in," Deku said. Sato smiled. "Well, that's something." Deku nodded. "Something won't be enough for the future. Keep in mind that there aren't simulations like this in the real world. Treat the world like you are supposed to here," he said. The class exclaimed in agreement and continued to watch the two move. Kirishima, rubbing his arms because of his situation during the exam, perked up suddenly. "Wait a minute. Kaminari and ♂𝗎𝗄 are out there, right?" Deku smirked as he turned to the hardening hero and nodded. "So, it's Midoriya and Yaoyorozu against Bakugo and Uraraka next, right?" "Oh, shit," Mina muttered. "I completely forgot that they hadn't gone yet," Zero said. "I wonder how they'll work together," Sato wondered. Midoriya and Yaoyorozu did work together to take down the giant QICD earlier this year. That was cool, 𝐻𝐸𝐽 said. They were pretty cool when they were kicking my ass, Abigail Winters said. I wasn't expecting your friend to be floating, though. Gyro shrugged. That's Midoriya for you. Uraraka and Bakugo haven't worked together before, though, she said. Deku smiled as they all talked among themselves. He focused one of the patrolling drones on Aoyama as he inspected the crime scene. Another drone could be seen following Ida as he approached his partner. It didn't take long for Ida to find the villain base. He had spotted Kaminari peeking out of a window for a second, giving away his location. The engine hero then sped off to find his partner somewhere in the city. That didn't take too long, either. Ida slid to a halt in front of Aoyama. The twinkling hero had just finished flaring his cape in a faux shop window when he arrived. Found them, he said. Aoyama continued to flare his cape. I feel a little more twinkly today, wouldn't you agree? Ooh, Ida slumped forward. Aoyama turned to his partner. Ida shook his head. Anyway, I found them. They're in a 3-story building 2 blocks down south. I only saw Kaminari, though, so I don't know who the other is, he said. My laser will work well in taking him down. What's the plan? Well, Ida started to pace. I can always rush him, but I'm not as light on my feet like Midoriya is. The villains will know we're coming if they haven't guessed already. Drawing them out into the open is doable, though Kaminari does significantly better in enclosed environments while I'm the opposite. I can't shoot what I can't see either, so I cannot blind fire from across the way, Aoyama said. So it looks like we have to meet the villains on their turf. I can back you up against Kaminari and whoever the second villain is, and once we have them pinned, we'll secure the hostages. Magnifique. Alan's why then? The twinkling hero cheered. Ida smiled underneath his helmet, and they ran off toward the villain base. As they ran, neither realized that they weren't alone on that street corner. Emerging from an alley behind the heroes was ♀in his hero gear. Aizawa's wrappings were still a part of his outfit in a dark purple jumpsuit with dark steel trimming. His belt buckle was of his vocal modifier and his wild purple hair. He raised his hand to his ear as he watched the two disappear. 𝗓𝗪𝗡, it's me, he said. They're on their way. It was Ida, right? Kaminari asked on the other end. Who else? Sparkles. What's his name? Aoyama. Oh boy, this'll be tough, he responded. Worry about keeping that Ida guy at bay. I'll handle Sparkles. Dude, I just told you his name. ♀rolled his eyes. Be ready. Mimic out. When Ida arrived at the villain base, he didn't see Kaminari in the window. The area was void of anybody, including cardboard cops and civilians. If he wasn't sure before, he knew now that this was the right place. When Aoyama finally caught up to his partner, he looked around while trying to catch his breath. Why you couldn't wait? We're running out of time. We had 7 minutes before they would escape, and we would fail. We shouldn't take our time to get them, he said. Aoyama wiped the sweat from his brow. Then it's a good thing we have some time to kill. Let's go, he declared. They ran into the building and ascended to the top where the villains were. The building itself was modeled like an office building. The building's lobby was mostly empty, though there were a few villainous cutouts on the floor. The walls and the desk were all smashed, and the generic logo of the building was tagged with spray paint. Behind the smashed desk was a stairwell leading up the building. Beside the desk was a series of elevators with only one of them open and an indicator light flashing. Ida approached the elevator and brushed his hand against the button. An open elevator door with power. Smells like a trap, he said. Aoyama wrinkled his nose. Such a foul stench. We should climb then. Ida nodded. Be careful. We don't know who our villains are besides Kaminari. If you see his pointers, get away if you can, he advised. With that, Ida was the first to climb the stairs with Aoyama behind him. As the two climbed the stairs, they passed several open doors leading to different building floors. Ida saw a few mock flyers posted on corkboards inside. It's a college dorm building. Look, Ida kept climbing. Aoyama walked toward the corkboard and pulled a flyer. Sure enough, it was a notice of a karaoke night coming up. You coming? Ida's voice called out. Right behind you. Aoyama stopped mid-sentence. He dropped the flyer, and his eyes went wide. At the doorway leading into the stairwell, ♀was standing there with his modulator on his face. He pulled it off and flashed him a smile. Follow your teammate up the stairs, he ordered him. He stepped aside as the twinkling hero passed him. Once he started climbing the stairs, ♀pressed his ear into the communication device. They're on their way. It's 3 against 1 now, he said quietly, careful not to let his voice echo. I'm ready up here. See you in a bit, Kaminari said. ♀nodded and carefully ascended the stairs, keeping his distance as he climbed. Back in the observation center, the class was in discussion mode, as everyone was betting whether or not Ida would notice before he was attacked. Deku was smiling as he watched the live feed. He watched Kaminari playing his pointers at different parts of the command room to trap Ida. ♀was stepping quietly behind Aoyama with a smile on his face. He had replaced his modulator and had a hand on his bindings. Deku glanced at Ajiro as he was talking to Kirishima. Oh, he's not happy. Brainwashing is never fun, but damn, he did a great job. Waited for an ideal moment and struck with precision akin to a surgical knife. But will this advantage hold? Deku shut his eyes for a moment and smiled. Hey Deku, Kirishima called out. He can do that. Make it 3-on-1. He asked. Oh, definitely. A villain will do whatever it takes to win. Well, a patient one will. In the field, it's the quiet ones to watch out for, he said. A brutish villain is conquerable, but a clever one will make your job interesting, he said. Have you gone against a clever villain or two? Deku smiled. I've met a few. Thankfully, we have a clever mind behind the Toshinori Hero Agency, he said. As the class continued their discussion, Deku sighed. I miss my team. Back in the villain lair, Ida led 𝐻𝐻𝐵 through a prisoner detention area. The engine hero gasped when he saw the QICDs behind the glass cases they were stuck in. He noticed some of them had holographic flags on them. See their QICDs. I thought Abigail destroyed them earlier in the year, he wondered. Well, with the AI they had and the combat prowess they possessed, it would be a waste to destroy them. I guess in this situation, they make excellent hostages for the test. He passed the computer terminal and brushed his hands against the monitor. Can't stop twinkling. Rescue the hostages while I distract the villains upstairs, he advised. Instead of 𝐻𝐻𝐵 speaking, ● mimicked his voice. We, sir. I'm on it, he responded while not activating his quirk. Ida ran to the stairs that led to the final floor of the building. 𝐻𝐻𝐵 quietly followed suit with ● right behind him. Once they rose the stairs, there was a long hallway that led to a single room. The door to the room was wide open. Inside was several consoles and monitors, villainous props, including airsoft gun racks, faux maps of the president's tour through the city, a schedule, and photographs of the QICD president and its staff filled the room. One of the many monitors in the room showed the detention room where the hostages were. At the far end of the room was Kaminari in his hero gear. He was leaning out the window and humming a quiet tune to himself. When Ida entered the room, he smiled and turned to him. There was the engine hero with 𝐻𝐻𝐵 and ● behind him. At that moment, Ida turned on his hero's voice. Villain, your reign of terror ends here, he called out. It took everything within Kaminari to not laugh. Oh, really? Yes, your crimes have led to your downfall. Surrender yourself and the hostages at once. Even ● had to crack a smile. And what will happen if I don't? Kaminari asked. Then you will face justice by the hands of Ingenium. Ida dropped into a racer's stance with his engines fired up. Kaminari adjusted his glasses and smiled. He raised his hand, making a gun gesture with his index finger and thumb. Come and get it. Ida smiled under his helmet and launched at the stun gun faux villain. Kaminari fired an electrical attack at the hero, redirecting from a pointer he fired at the ground before the hero entered the room. Ida was able to follow the bolt and moved out of the way to avoid being hit. Nearly running over the pointer, the engine hero continued his advance. The stun gun faux villain dove out of the way as Ida crashed into the wall behind him. Turning on a heel, Ida spun around and charged once more. Kaminari created a small electrical field at the moment before the engine hero caught him. The shock sent him flying into a pillar in the middle of the room, crushing a pointer placed there earlier. Ida cursed himself as he struggled to his feet. Right then, gotta do this now. On his feet, the hero scanned the room. His eyes widened as he saw multiple pointers spread out across the room. It had been a trap. Do not think you have the upper hand, villain. I have reinforcements. Kaminari smiled. Dude, me too. Ida's eyes widened as he turned to the door. At that moment, a sparkly laser blast erupted and hit Ida square in the chest, sending him into a faux console. He slumped to the ground and groaned. The stun gun faux villain smiled. Well, Mimic, looks like it all worked out, he called out. Ida looked up to see 𝐻𝐻𝐵 standing at the doorway with glassy eyes and a slack jaw. Behind him was ●, and he had his hand on the twinkling hero's shoulders. He had a smile on his face and a twinkle in his eyes. Awa, what's wrong, hero? Did the plan not go the way you wanted it to? He asked mockingly. Ida shook his head. Why you? You probably forgot that I could do this, huh? Too bad really, since I wanted to capture the both of you. But my partner says that it isn't fun, the faux villain said. The engine hero revved his engines and rose to his feet. You won't win, villains. I will save you, can't stop twinkling. I will save the hostages as well, he declared. ● chuckled behind 𝐻𝐻𝐵. This'll be fun. 𝐻𝐻𝐵, attack Ida. The twinkling hero nodded and fired another laser at the engine hero. Ida raced off, dodging the attack and moving across the room. 𝐻𝐻𝐵 followed his partner with ●'s help while Kaminari simply watched. As Ida moved around the room, he used bursts of 𝗏 to boost away when his partner's lasers got close to hitting him. These little boosts forced ● so forcibly move his brainwashed ally to catch him. Ida slipped behind a pillar, braced as it exploded above him, and leaned out with his helmet in hand. With careful aim, he threw it at his partner. ● pushed him out of the way and smacked the object away. Oh no, you don't. Kaminari jumped into the fray and fired a focused shot at Ida. The electrical attack bounced off of one anchor point and redirected at the engine hero. A quick shock was all that was needed to send him back into the wall. ● smiled and pushed 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐼 toward his partner. "Bind him so we can win," he said. "Mon, this was easy," 𝗵𝐴𝐺 said. In the control room, Deku smirked. As the stun gun foe villain went to grab 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐼, Ida shook off the effects of the attack and grabbed a broken piece of machinery and threw it at them. ● didn't have time to react as the stone soared through the air and bounced off 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐼's shoulder. Ida revved his engines and blasted off toward 𝗵𝐴𝐺. The foe villain tossed 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐼 to the side, said sorry for tossing him, and generated enough electrical energy to create a shield around him. The shield went up and zapped Ida away. He crashed into another pillar and slumped down with his hair standing up. With the hero down for the count, ● sighed heavily and brushed his hair back. "Well, that happened," he said. 𝗵𝐴𝐺 nodded. "So, we win now, right?" ● shrugged. "Deku usually announces it by now. I wonder what's up. Maybe he wasn't paying attention. I'll capture Ida while you do the same for 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐼," 𝗵𝐴𝐺 said. ● nodded and walked over to where 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐼 was. The twinkling hero was face down but propped up at an angle as if he was resting on a lounge. He knelt to his level while 𝗵𝐴𝐺 grabbed the capture tape. When he grabbed 𝐒𝐽𝐽𝐼's shoulders and turned him around, he realized his mistake. Once turned around, 𝗬𝐽𝐼's eyes burst open, and he fired his naval laser at the brainwashing foe villain. ● flew through the air and crashed into 𝗵𝐴𝐺 from behind. The two slammed into the wall behind Ida and slumped down to the ground. The two were knocked out on impact. The room was quiet for a moment as the dust settled. After a moment, 𝗬𝐽𝐼 groaned and managed to pull himself up and brace against the wall. He shook his head and focused his attention on his downed partner. His progress was slow, however. He managed to get to his partner and help him to his feet. It was difficult, to say the least, but he managed to lead his friend out of the room. He walked down the hall toward the hostages. Opening the doors, 𝗬𝐽𝐼 set the 𝗂𝐼CDs free from their prison. One of the Secret Service 𝗂𝐼CDs helped 𝗬𝐽𝐼 with Ida, and together, they managed to leave the building thanks to the elevator. Once on the street, they managed to exit the simulation area. Nearby, Deku watched as Recovery Girl entered the building to take ● and 𝗵𝐴𝐺 while Abigail Winters helped 𝗬𝐽𝐼 with it. He raised the mini microphone to his lips and made the announcement. The hero team successfully rescued all hostages and subdued the villains. Hero team wins. Inside the hero lounge, Midoriya looked over at Yaoyorozu. The everything hero nodded, and the two rose to stretch. They waited patiently for Deku to come in and give them their assignments. In the villain lounge, Bakugo and Uraraka were already being briefed by 𝗏 on their mission. Each of them was given a key and a location of their base. One final match, and it's my team, Deku thought as the field was clear. It took a few minutes, but when Deku entered the hero's lounge, he already had the wire launchers in hand. He handed them to Midoriya and Yaoyorozu as he explained the exam to them. Your villains are already setting up as we speak. When the buzzer sounds, you'll both have 15 minutes to engage them before they escape with the hostages. So far, only Team 1 has called in their enforcer against your teammates. Your villains could call theirs in if they want to. He informed them, you'll be given special flash drives to activate radio towers to triangulate the villain's location. It's time-consuming but effective in finding them. Can we stop the villains from calling an enforcer? Yaoyorozu asked. No, unless you capture the villains and confiscate their keys. They can call in their enforcer from any terminal on site. The cell towers can call them in, too, so be careful with that, Deku said. Any combat rules? Midoriya asked. Villains can subdue and capture you to win. Nothing stops you from doing the same against the villains. However, you have to be careful doing that. Suppose they aren't at the base when you subdue them. In that case, you won't be able to rescue the hostages since they can't relay the exact location to you. And since all of these buildings are similar on the outside, checking every single one for the hostages will be time-consuming, Deku said. Midoriya nodded. Now, enforcers are a different bunch. As I said before, it will be a random pro hero that'll assume the mantle. The villains will not know who their enforcer is once they're called into action. The enforcer cannot be recalled unless they are either subdued or evaded until the hostages are safe, the future symbol continued. No backup for heroes. None at all. In these situations where high-value targets are at risk, team-ups are beneficial. However, reinforcements will be spread thin. In this exercise, the remaining pro heroes in the area are assisting law enforcement elsewhere. Don't always assume you'll have a backup and give it your very best. The two heroes to be nodded. Yaoyorozu slipped on the wire arrow pack and pocketed her flash drive. Deku, seeing that they were ready, led them out of the room into the testing grounds entrance. The large steel gates were sealed when they arrived with Mr. Aizawa next to them. When the two arrived at the gate, the Erasure hero nodded. I hope you both remember your strengths. This simulation is not to be taken lightly, he advised. The two nodded. Yes, sir. Mr. Aizawa glanced at Deku. "The villains are ready. I gave them their standard 15-minute prep time," he said. Deku nodded. "Right then. Best of luck, you two. The scores right now are tied with 2 hero and 2 villain victories. Best of luck to you both." The 2 young heroes turned to see the gate open up. Once given the go-ahead, the 2 passed under the portico and entered the testing ground. The gate sealed itself behind them, beginning the exam. Recovery Girl and Snipe were in the command center with the rest of Class 2 when the exam began. Ada and Aoyama were at the back of the group, quietly munching on the food left there from the teachers. ● was still rubbing the back of his head from his exam. Abigail Winters had just finished transfusing her healing quirk to Kaminari when J.I.R.O came by and smacked his arm. She had a smile on her face as she did it, though. When the last hero team entered the testing zone, Snipe sighed. "Here we go. Why would Deku put those 2 together? They're not that compatible," Recovery Girl said. "Brains and brawn go very well together," Shoji chimed in. "Yeah, but Midoriya is scary smart. He knows a lot of things about heroes and quirks," Kirishima said. "𝗷𝗻𝗲 is crazy book smart and still growing," Ashido said. "Bonafide genius. 2 smart heroes against 2 combat villains. This should be fun," J.I.R.O smirked. Kaminari smiled. "Midoriya against Uraraka. This should be fun." When the gates sealed shut behind them, they went to work. Yaoyorozu fished out a holo-disc map of the testing area. "Ready?" she asked her partner. "As I'll ever be." "What are we looking at?" Activating the holo-disc, Yaoyorozu revealed the map. "So it looks like we got a small section of the entire battleground. It looks like 20 blocks, maybe more," she said. "Small play zone should move this along." Ida and Aoyama were the last to go, so I bet that Ida sped off to look for the villains, he said. The everything hero nodded. He probably surveyed the whole area before finding them. With his armor, he probably revealed himself when he found them. The element of surprise is key here. A quick blitz attack, once we know where they are, should minimize the collateral damage and subdue them before they can call for an enforcer, Midoriya said. If it's a surgical strike, an improperly planned blitz attack could cause more unnecessary damage. We should determine our villains before we come to a decision, she said. Midoriya nodded. What can we do? Well, we need surveillance. The everything hero ran to a small alley nearby and activated her quirk. You don't look okay, she asked. Midoriya nodded and turned away with a slight blush on his face. Good thing there aren't any cameras here, he muttered. Yaoyorozu shivered. Thanks for that image. Sorry, Midoriya shrieked as the hairs on his neck stood straight up. I was hoping you wouldn't hear that. Yaoyorozu shook her head and groaned. I almost got it. He heard her quirk subside, followed by a light curse from the everything hero. He looked back to see her adjusting her leotard with one hand and holding a helmet in the other. The helmet was red with gold trimmings and looked like a boxing helmet with a glass visor. The top of the helmet had ample room for her ponytail. On the right side of it was a small switch. She put the helmet on and started to create a few more things. A small controller and a small quadcopter drone with a camera on it. Gee, got it, she finally said. Midoriya found a smile forming as he figured out her plan. Great idea, Yaoyorozu. But that's a large area to cover with the drone. We will expend our time before we find them. Which is why we aren't searching the whole zone. When Deku told us of the towers, I hoped that we would have 3 towers for triangulation, and we do. She pulled up the map. They're located at the far east part of the test zone. I can have the drone search that area for our villains while we canvass the original scene, she explained. Midoriya nodded. We don't have much time left before they escape. Send it out, he said. Yaoyorozu nodded and tossed the drone into the air. She turned on the controller and smiled. My first heads-up display works. Oh, thank goodness too, she exclaimed. Midoriya smiled as she sent the drone away. A small screen appeared in her visor with a live stream of the drone camera flying toward the testing ground's eastern area. Once it was away, she pulled out her phone and tapped on it a few times before pocketing it once more. The drone will be looking for any signs of movement. It's programmed to search that area and is small enough that the villains won't see the drone, but I wouldn't want to take any chances. Midoriya nodded. Let's go then. The two ran further into the testing zone. Abigail watched when Yaoyorozu created the drone inside the viewing room and flew it toward the villain's hideout. Damn is right, Mina said. Get it, 𝗷𝗻𝗲. Oh, Kirishima cried out as he rubbed his ear. It's lucky that she thought of it. Midoriya is quick and agile, but checking those buildings would have been too much, Sato said. Why wouldn't the villains try to intercept them? We got the go-ahead, Tsu wondered. Snipe chuckled. While I'm sure Bakugo isn't happy with sitting around and waiting, charging in without a plan isn't a smart decision for both heroes and villains. He has no idea who his heroes are. Arguably, he could rush out there. However, he could leave his partner vulnerable as well as the hostages. Sticking together keeps their power strong, he explained. True, we stuck together when we went out there, remembered Tsu. Zero asked. Ribbit was her answer. When the two heroes arrived at the faux scene of the crime, they found a mess outside the mock bank. 𝐒𝐩𝐢𝐳 was standing opposite a cardboard police officer while Midoriya checked out the building's massive hull. He made a note of the villain cutouts lying on the ground inside the bank with multiple hero cutouts over them. 𝐒𝐩𝐢𝐳 bowed to the cutout before approaching her partner. "So this was a bank heist gone wrong," she said. "Kidnapping the heads of state was a crime of opportunity. It looks that way, but they chose this bank at the same time they showed up and along the same route. I think that the bank heist wasn't the intention here," Midoriya countered. "It was a risky decision then. If the villains made too much noise, it would not have been possible." According to the police report, the hero response was also pretty fast. The everything hero said, if their original plan was to kidnap them and this bank heist wasn't their true intentions, then they knew how big the risk was and planned countermeasures. Midoriya looked around some more. Although, there is another theory. Maybe another group was outside and near where the president and prime minister were and kidnapped them during the chaos. He said, "Did the report say how many villains entered the building?" 7 in total, including the big guy. "Then, I'm going to guess there are 6 in here. The big guy was caught up the road from here," he said, "which leaves a small group of villains free to kidnap the president and prime minister," 𝐒𝐢𝐳 said. "A small team to disarm the Secret Service and get them all into hiding without raising any alarms." Midoriya nodded. He turned to the hole in the faux bank when 𝐒𝐢𝐳's helmet pinged her. Her HUD opened a small window with a live feed from her drone. A smile formed as she waved down her partner. "Deku, I got something." The young inheritor walked over as the everything hero pulled out her phone. "My drone picked up movement several blocks east of here," she said. "It looks like 2 people holed up inside an old office building." Midoriya watched the feed. The drone appeared to have entered through an open window and stayed close to the ceiling. The young inheritor's smile faded when he saw their villains, 𝐈𝐧𝐿𝐼𝐺 and 𝗂𝗏𝗏. 𝐒𝐢𝐳's eyes widened. "Well, this got a little more interesting," she said. "Your girlfriend and rival kicking your butt will surely keep any attention off me." She smiled at the young inheritor. Midoriya glanced at 𝐒𝐢𝐳. "Don't make a fishing pole and dangle me outside their base," he said. 𝐒𝐢𝐳's smile only widened. "I would never. Besides, you're too heavy for any regular string." "Thanks, 𝐬𝐸𝐷." Inside the faux villain base, Bakugo sighed as he leaned against the wall. "What's taking those heroes so long to find us?" he bellowed. "I'd hate to win by time running out." 𝗂𝗏𝗏 shrugged as she juggled a few chairs in the air with her quirk. "It's not like they know where we are. Just gotta wait for them to make a move," she said. Bakugo rolled his eyes. "I can't believe you talked me into staying in here until they make a move," he complained. "I'm surprised you listened to me when I did. Honestly, I should play the lotto because of that." "Shut up, cheeks." 𝗂𝗏𝗏 smiled and continued focusing on the floating chairs. "You gotta chill sometimes. Honestly, you're so tense that it's making me uneasy," she said. "Maybe you should be stabbed by Shigaraki in multiple places." "So you know why?" he said. She stopped playing with the chairs. "You know, for someone with little tolerance towards Deku, what you did was so don't," Bakugo growled. "It's over and I'm over it. Besides, getting frozen by those robots took my mind off it." 𝗂𝗏𝗏 nodded and continued juggling the chairs. Bakugo looked back at her and rubbed his chest. "You and Deku doing all right?" "Huh?" Bakugo rolled his eyes. "You and Deku are doing all right," he shouted. "Oh, yeah, we are. I'm honestly surprised you're asking," she admitted. "Well, sometimes that nerd needs someone to keep an eye on him. Since you two are fucking blind sometimes, I guess I have to ask," Bakugo grumbled. "Awa, you do care," she said with a smile. Bakugo rolled his eyes once more. "Whatever. It's fine as long as he doesn't slack in his training. He can be all lovey-dovey to you on his time off," he said. "Mr. Next Symbol of Peace needs to keep his head on right. You do know he's not stupid, right?" Bakugo smirked. "That's up for debate," he said. 𝗂𝗏𝗏 dropped the chairs and released her quirk. "You're something else," she said. "And you're talking too much. Shut up and keep an eye out for those heroes." 𝗂𝗏𝗏 rolled her eyes and walked out of the room and toward the prisoner room. She was unaware of the quadcopter drone hovering outside of the window. It flew up to the roof and settled on a box. Once the live feed cut, 𝗂𝗢𝐳 nudged Midoriya. "So, what do you think?" "Well, no audio doesn't help us much," he said. "Sorry, but the live stream feature came at the cost of live audio," she said. "Anyway, now we have them ID in a location. Let's plan, way ahead of you. First, we should head to the cell towers near their base," he said. The everything hero nodded, and the duo ran toward the villain base. To save time, 𝗂𝗢𝗳 created a set of skates and passed her partner. Midoriya smirked as he activated full cowl to keep up with her. After a few minutes, the duo arrived at an office building near the villain base. It wasn't as tall as the surrounding buildings and was not marked by any particular indicators. 𝗂𝗢𝗳 tossed the skates away and turned to her partner. Midoriya nodded and kneeled next to her. In a move that drew wide eyes and raised eyebrows from the spectating class, 𝗂𝗢𝗳 climbed on his back and hooked her legs around his torso. Kaminari stared at the screen and angled his head down for a bit, prompting Gyro to jam her aux cords into the back of his neck. Once she was secured on his back, Midoriya leaped into the air and used his black whip to grapple onto the roof and pull them up the building. The Everything Hero's grip tightened as he flipped over the edge and landed on the roof. Now settled, the duo checked the cell tower. It was a standard tower with a dish at the top. At the base of it was a computer set up with a monitor and a small keyboard attached. The keyboard had 2 critical slots at the bottom and a big red button covered in a glass case in between them. Yaoyorozu checked on her drone by tapping her helmet while Midoriya inspected the setup. The villains are getting antsy. Bakugo is pacing around the place, she said. If you have a plan, we need it now. Midoriya turned to her. All right, I have a plan. He motioned for her to get closer. She inspected the setup while he explained the plan. The keys we got from Deku activate these towers. We have to insert the key, turn it in, and input our team number as the password. We are Team 5, so that's our password, he said. Once it's in, a signal is sent and alerts the villains. Yaoyorozu nodded. Are you proposing what I think you're proposing? Midoriya nodded. A bait and switch. I lure the villains out here while you sneak into their base and free the hostages, he said. Yaoyorozu nodded and thought about the plan. With your speed, you can make it seem as though we are taking 1 tower each. Both villains will deploy to stop us in our tracks, she said. And Kaken is restless, right? The second the alarm sounds in their base, he'll rush right in to fight. The Everything Hero smiled. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her key. I'll need a head start, she said. Midoriya nodded and kneeled. We'll get there faster if I take you. I won't be able to take you there directly, but I can get you close. She nodded and climbed onto his back. If Ochako saw this, I think she would kill me, she said. She gets piggyback rides too, so she shouldn't be that bad. But I think you're right, Midoriya said before leaping off the roof. The duo flew through the air thanks to Midoriya's float and Air Force smashes. He maneuvered through buildings with the grace and strength of a competitive swimmer. He leaped off an I-beam suspended over a small construction site across a faux park. When Midoriya landed on the ground, he slipped them through an alleyway and eyed the building where the faux villains were. Bakugo was poking his head from the window and nearly spotted the heroes had they not ducked back into the shadows. When he returned to the cell tower, Midoriya sighed heavily. He held Yaoyorozu's key in his hand and inserted it. Showtime, he told himself. Once the key was in, he turned it counterclockwise 3 times. Each turn was heavier than the last one but was still doable. Once the key stopped turning, he put in the team name as the password and clicked on the execute command. Once he hit it, he activated full cowl and leaped off toward the second tower. Using Black Whip and Float, he pulled himself from building to building until he found the second tower. This time, the tower was on top of a larger building that nearly dominated the faux city's skyline. A thought crept in his mind that the city was almost livable if not for the robot patrols and villains. He flew up the building and touched down to turn on the second tower. While he turned on the second tower, Bakugo was checking the clock mounted over the hallway leading to the QICD hostages. They started at the top of the hour, so it was easy to keep track of their 15 minutes. With 3 minutes left on the clock, he had half a mind to go out there and fight the heroes before time was up. His readjusted grenadier gauntlets were evident of this. Right before he could leap out of the window, the alarms inside the building started to blare. He stumbled at the windowsill as Uraraka came running in. It's a cell tower. The heroes are actually going for it, she called out. Bakugo smiled as he eyed the clock. Those bastards are in for it now. I'm going. Wait, what about the... Before she could finish, another alarm started to blare. She ran over to one of the consoles, and her eyes widened. Another cell tower. One more, and they are free to capture us and win, she said. Like hell, they will. Sheiks, you take the closest tower and deal with the hero there. I'll go to the other. And with that, he blasted off out of the building. Uraraka sighed as she readied her collapsible bow staff. So much for actually using my name, she muttered as she fired her grappling hook and shot off toward one of the towers. On the ground, Yaoyorozu watched the anti-gravity faux villain fly out of the building. Seeing her chance, she dashed toward the main lobby of the building. She ran past what would be the receptionist's desk and ran into the only working elevator. The doors were wide open, and the light was the only thing working. Once she was inside, she eyed the hatch directly over her head. Creating a grappling hook, she jumped up, opened the hatch, and climbed out of the unit. She steadied herself for a moment before aiming her grappling hook up. Once she found her first anchor point, she fired the hook and shot up the shaft. She repeated the action multiple times before she reached the top of the shaft. Thankfully, the door was already open. When she exited the elevator shaft, she burst through a door and ran down the hallway and toward the hostage area. She smiled as she checked the feed from the drone. This thing mapped out this entire floor so that I won't be aimlessly searching for the detention room. I am so glad this worked, she cheered. Little did she know that the villains had prepared for it. While they were unaware of the drone, they left behind a small sensor at the door where she came bursting out. As soon as she passed it, it started to emit a silent alarm that reached only one of the villains. 𝗵𝘃𝐲 was nearing the first tower when he saw the ruse. The area was void of any hero. The console attached to the cell tower was blinking, and a single key was in its slot. He growled as he reached for his communicator. Hey Cheeks, there's no one here, he called out. Same here. I think they went to the other 𝗃𝗄𝗄𝗧 alerted the explosive faux villain. Cheeks, there's an alarm coming from the base. Someone is there trying to free the prisoners. We got played. Like the fiddle you are. 𝗵𝘃𝐲's head snapped up to see Midoriya come flying in with his feet sticking straight out. The explosive villain didn't have time to react as the young inheritor kicked him hard, sending him to the ground. Midoriya stayed floating in the air as he pressed on his communicator. 𝗃𝗄𝗧𝗏, your position is compromised. I think 𝗃𝗏𝗧𝗏 will be coming to you, he said. I just got to the cells. I'm getting the hostages out now. What about 𝗵𝘃𝗲? The explosive villain groaned as he picked himself up. Dynamite is mine. Deku, going dark, he said before switching off his communicator and using his Delaware smash to rocket toward his foe. 𝗵𝘃𝗲 smiled as he blasted the ground beneath him. The two clashed in mid-air with a fire in their eyes. When the day started for them, the last thing they were expecting was a 2v2 with pro heroes on standby as a villain enforcer. When her team was announced, Mina Ashido didn't think that she would win, despite being on Todoroki's team. While they did win, they won dirty by tricking Kirishima and having him hanging over a pool of acid. He didn't appreciate it when the match was done, but she felt like she did wonderfully after a talk from Deku. Villains will play dirty when they can't match a hero's strength or intelligence. Don't feel bad if you get played dirty in the future, alright. The acid user smiled as they were moved to the side. They watched as their classmates completed their exams, with Deku giving them play-by-plays from the field. He would even have them answer surprise questions, ranging from how a specific maneuver would help a different team standard questions relating to hostage work. When it came to the final match, her smile was as wide as ever. Watching Midoriya and Yaoyorozu face off against 𝗵𝘃𝗲 and Uraraka was a matchup she didn't expect. But when they clashed in the field, she didn't know who to root for. She watched as Midoriya swing off of a lamppost and kick the explosive faux villain out of the air was glorious. When 𝗵𝘃𝗲 recovered with a mid-air backflip and fired an underhanded explosion, she nearly squeaked. The two rivals landed on the ground facing the other. Midoriya smiled as he brushed some smoke from his hair before leaping forward with a quick push of one for all energy. 𝗵𝘃𝗲 responded by firing an explosion at the ground in front of him at point-blank range, causing the young inheritor to leap to the side and fire a wide roundhouse kick. The explosive hero blocked the attack with ease and countered with another blast. Before it could connect, Midoriya had already disappeared in a flash of green light. Before he could register his disappearance, the young inheritor surprised him with a gut punch, sending 𝗵𝘃𝗲 flying into the window of one of the office buildings. Midoriya smiled and followed him into the building. While the two continued their fight indoors, Yaoyorozu was busy in the villain lair on the other side of the city. She hacked into the computer controlling the cells and opened them up. Once the doors were open, she spun around, created a slingshot in her forearm, and fired some ammo at the security camera overlooking the station. The 𝗂𝐈CDs exited the cells, with President 𝗂𝐈CD walking up to her. Thank you, young hero. I was getting worried, it said in a female voice. Madam President, are there others? Yaoyorozu asked. No, the villains locked us all up together. I overheard them talking about collecting a ransom, she said. Well, it looks like they missed out on a massive payday. We have to get out of here before they come back, the everything hero advised. The 𝗂𝐈CD nodded and motioned for one of the units to start moving. The MECHs, most likely Secret Service 𝗂𝐈CDs, started moving with the Prime Minister's guards. They ran down the hall and toward the stairwell. The Secret Service 𝗂𝐈CDs burst through while a few ushered the President and the Prime Minister. Following their lead, Yaoyorozu created a bow staff and had a few of her Russian dolls. As they moved further down the building, Yaoyorozu's communicator buzzed. 𝗃𝗄𝗧𝗏, what's your status? Hostages secured. Moving to extraction. Be ready. 𝗃𝗏𝗧𝗏 is moving to intercept, Midoriya said. Wow, this radio talk is interesting. Yaoyorozu smirked and rolled her eyes. Practice it later, K. As soon as she rounded a flight of stairs, the window facing her shattered. The everything hero had a split second to create a cushion as she faced her opponent as she smashed through the window with her legs extended. Yaoyorozu was sent flying as Uraraka's kick connected with the buffer. The everything hero slumped to the ground and groaned. Uraraka stood over her with her bow staff at the ready. Gotcha. Yaoyorozu smirked as she picked herself up. Not this time. She raised her bow staff to a defensive position. Your move. Uraraka smiled and leaped at her with her staff raised for an overhead strike. Yaoyorozu blocked and dropped her left hand, causing the gravity faux villain's staff to slide down. The everything hero spun around and swung a reverse roundhouse kick toward her opponent's head. 𝗂𝗧𝗏 ducked quickly and backed away. 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐳 sighed and lunged in while spinning her bow staff. 𝗂𝗧𝗏 blocked it with ease, knocked it away, and fired a wire at the wall behind her opponent. The mechanism pulled quickly, sending the faux villain into 𝗂𝗧𝗏's personal space, knocking her to the wall. She followed up by slamming her bow staff at her, causing the everything hero to block it. The two struggled as they pushed against each other. They both had a fire in their eyes as they strained to break the other's attack. 𝗂𝗧𝗏 moved her bow staff so she could keep her grip on hers while grabbing 𝗂𝗧𝗏's. She pushed against her opponent and tossed her bow staff down the stairs before bursting through a nearby door. 𝗂𝗧𝗏 shook off the attack and grabbed a spare collapsible staff before following the everything hero through the door. 𝗂𝗧𝗏 threw open the door and froze. Nestled on the handle on the inside was one of 𝗂𝗧𝗏's Russian dolls. The top was popped off, revealing a small cylinder. The faux villain had a second to turn away and leap back as the flashbang exploded. Down the hallway, 𝗂𝗧𝗏 smiled. She pressed a finger on her communicator. "Madam President, I have the villain's attention. Keep moving, and we'll meet up once she's dealt with." "Got it. Stay safe, hero." 𝗂𝗧𝗏 smiled as she switched to her partner's comm. "Deku, come in. I've engaged with 𝗂𝗧𝗏. The hostages are still moving." "Great work. I'm keeping Dynamite busy for now. Capture 𝗂𝗧𝗏 if you can." "Copy." She continued to run down the hall. Close behind her, 𝗂𝗧𝗏 had her staff ready and was in hot pursuit. Inside the observation room, Principal 𝗧𝗪 smiled. "As you all can see, communication is key. It is also worth noting that Midoriya's primary objective is to contain 𝗵𝘃𝗀 instead of fighting to capture him. It's also worth noting that the two are heavily invested in each other in terms of combat." All Might said, "Some heroes will have a nemesis, and their shared history can play out to either party's advantage." Mr. Aizawa nodded. Notice that 𝗂𝗧𝗏 isn't entirely focused on escorting the hostages. She knows that keeping the villain busy is necessary. If they had a backup that the villains did not account for, a third hero would be leading them to safety. Instead, the President's Secret Service leads the escape as they are considered one of the world's best security organizations. They can have quirks that can make the job easier for the heroes. The students all started murmuring among themselves. Mina, however, raised her hand. "Wait a minute, where's Deku?" she asked. The class stopped their conversations. "Yeah, he's usually asking the questions or something," Kirishima noted. "Bathroom break or something." Siro wondered. Mr. Aizawa stole a glance at Principal 𝗧𝗪. He shrugged and motioned to the monitor. "He'll be back in a minute, I think. Let's keep watching." Back at the battle between the two rivals, 𝗵𝘃𝗀 perched onto a ruined light pole and thrust his hands out. "Stay down, 𝗬𝗂." He fired a barrage of high-power explosive blasts. Midoriya used roughly 45% of one for all to dodge his attacks. He moved gracefully and fast enough that 𝗵𝘃𝗀 was finding it difficult to keep track of him. He switched to his AP autocannon and sprayed the street in explosive rounds, shrouding in thick, black smoke. When the smoke cleared, the explosive faux villain panted heavily and rubbed his wrists. He growled and checked his gauntlets. "Not yet," he muttered to himself. He leaped off of the light pole and surveyed the carnage. The road was ruined along with many faux cars and other objects. As he scanned the street, Midoriya was high in the sky, floating against the side of a building. He wiped the sweat off of his brow and shook his head, clearing any smoke that was in his hair. "That was close. I gotta be more careful with his blasts," he muttered. He scanned the rest of the block. "I gotta keep him on the move. Just being here is working, but keeping his attention squared on me is my best bet." He paused mid-thought as his eyes widened. "Oh, crap, this is just like our first battle simulation last year. What is my older self thinking?" "I can hear you up there," 𝗵𝘃𝗀 shouted. Midoriya's attention returned to the ground, where 𝗵𝘃𝗀 was glaring at him. "Asshole, how about you come down here so we can fight like men? I don't suppose I can convince you to come up here and fight like birds, huh?" 𝗵𝘃𝗀 grinned. "Let's see what you got." He blasted the ground beneath him and launched into the air. Midoriya's eyes widened as the faux villain crashed into him and held him by his mask's ears. 𝗵𝘃𝗀 used his free hand to propel himself up the building with his feet planted on the wall while running and holding the young inheritor. The young inheritor swung like a bag of potatoes as they climbed the building. Using his momentum from moving around so much, Midoriya swung forward and derailing 𝗵𝘃𝗀's ascension. The two flew over the ruined road and toward an empty office building. Midoriya reoriented himself first by using a Delaware smash and float. Once he stopped spinning, he fired off his black whip and managed to snag 𝗵𝘃𝗀 in midair. The young inheritor pulled him in with great force, somersaulted in the air with his captured rival, and used the momentum to throw him into the building. 𝗵𝘃𝗀 slammed into a cubicle wall and slumped to the ground, with his opponent exactly where he wanted him. Midoriya used dual black whip to grab both sides of the smashed window. He sent his rival in and pulled himself toward his opponent. 𝗵𝘃𝐲 got up just in time to dodge as the young inheritor crashed through the cubicle and flew further into the office space. The explosive foe villain shook off the dust from his unwarranted entrance and fired a standard explosive blast. The explosion forced Midoriya to burst through some rubble and fire an Air Force blast of air to counter it. When the two attacks met in the middle, 𝗵𝘃𝐲 dashed forward with his hand primed for an explosion while Midoriya vanished from his path. 𝗵𝘃𝐲 growled as he turned to his right side. "Fuck you." He fired a blast at where the young inheritor reappeared. The blast was strong enough to knock Midoriya back. He flew through the air and landed hard on his back. 𝗵𝘃𝐲 leaped into the air and fired an explosive follow-up attack. The young inheritor had enough time to roll away as the blast came down on where he was. Swinging to his feet, Midoriya launched off of his back foot and sprang forward. With his leg prepped for a roundhouse kick, Midoriya swung and knocked 𝗵𝘃𝐲 back. The attack sent him flying out of the building and toward another. With a second to breathe, he radioed in. "𝗂𝐴𝐷, what's your status?" "I taught your girlfriend too much about fighting with the bow staff," she responded. Midoriya smiled as he kept an eye on the hole he made. "I have dynamite contained for now. Deal with 𝗂𝗏𝗏 and get the hostages out of there," he said. "On it." She cut the connection at that moment. Midoriya looked up to see 𝗵𝘃𝐲 rushing in with his hand raised. He didn't react in time as the explosive foe villain fired an explosive round point blank. The attack didn't do so much damage as it was a stunning attempt so he can gain the upper hand. It worked when the foe villain grabbed the young inheritor's arm and used an explosion to hurl him out of the building. 𝗵𝘃𝐲 groaned and pressed against his ear. "Hey Cheeks, tell me you got the hostages." 𝗂𝐴𝐷 is holding her ground. "I'm trying to go for them, but she keeps stopping me," she reported. "Wah Ponytail, damn it, of course, this would be her idea. Make her float or something and get them back. What do you think I've been doing?" 𝗵𝘃𝐲 bit his tongue and growled. "I'd hate to say it, but having another villain on site might be beneficial," he said. "I won't be able to get to a console and set up the call. Find an opening and use one of the towers," she advised. "Shut up and focus." 𝗵𝘃𝐲 shut off the communicator and blasted out of the building just to be hit by a blast of air. Midoriya, set up with his Air Force gauntlets, waited patiently for his opponent to reappear. He fired a single blast of air with a well-aimed shot that nailed the foe villain in the stomach, stopping his forward momentum. 𝗵𝘃𝐲 fell hard on his back and groaned as the blast left a lingering pain. Midoriya flinched when he landed. He ran over to help up the foe villain but stopped when he saw that 𝗵𝘃𝐲 rolled over on his stomach with his right arm underneath his body. It took the young inheritor one too many seconds to realize the trap he had just walked into as the foe villain rolled over and fired an explosive blast at him. The blast rocked the block as the windows of the nearby buildings cracked. The explosion 𝗵𝘃𝐲 fired alerted the hostages and the two young heroes to be as they fought in the villain HQ. 𝗂𝗏𝗏 had leaped out of a window, used her quirk on herself, and used her grapple hooks to swing around and crash into a window where 𝗂𝗏𝗧 was. The everything hero didn't register her maneuver until she felt her large, pink book smash into her back and send her flying. 𝗂𝗏𝗧 used her momentum to roll backward and leap to her feet. She dropped her bow staff and pressed her fist against her stomach, creating a boxing glove over her hand. 𝗂𝗏𝗏 smiled as she dropped her staff and entered a defensive stance. The everything hero smiled and charged in, prompting 𝗂𝗏𝗏 to do the same. The foe villain ducked as 𝗂𝗏𝗧 fired a high right hook. 𝗂𝗏𝗏 reached for her opponent's core with her quirk ready, only to press against a small shield, removing its gravity as a result. 𝗂𝗏𝗧 backed away and fired a low-angled uppercut, barely brushing against 𝗂𝗏𝗏's bangs. She followed up with a left jab and started to push forward, meeting the foe villain's blocks and sweeping evasion. With every block, she countered with better results. The two broke off from their close-quarter fight before 𝗂𝗏𝗏 charged back in. She slipped underneath an incoming attack and grabbed 𝗂𝗏𝗧's bow staff. She flipped to meet the everything hero's gloved hook straight in her cheek. 𝗂𝗏𝗏 stumbled backward, opening herself up to several follow-ups by the hero-to-be. 𝗂𝗏𝗧 smiled, knocked the foe villain away with a rising hammer strike, and created a spring-loaded boxing glove from her stomach, making direct contact with 𝗂𝗏𝗏. The spring-loaded gag attack sent the foe villain flying backward with wide eyes. "What?" she screeched as she slammed against a wall. 𝗂𝗏𝗧 smiled as the spring fell from her stomach. "I think I've finally improved that technique. The timing is perfect," she cheered to herself. 𝗂𝗏𝗏 groaned as she got back up and eyed her opponent. She smiled as she straightened her back. "Why, you definitely getting better. Though that doesn't mean that I'm not," she said. She twirled her staff before moving into a combat stance. "Arm yourself." The everything hero smiled as she created another bow staff and readied herself in a defensive stance. "You're training with Midoriya. No wonder you're getting stronger. Deku and I train, but I'm making myself strong on my own. I can't tell you how many times I've surprised him whenever we spar," 𝗂𝗏𝗏 said with a smile. 𝗂𝗏𝗧 smirked. "Well then, bring it on." The two heroes to be charged forward, and their staffs clashed. The resulting ring from the metals clashing was loud enough to echo throughout the hallway. Uraraka jerked to the side to break her opponent's guard and swung it around to miss Ieyaruzu's head narrowly. The everything hero slammed her staff into Uraraka's to block another attack. And that's when they both heard an alarm. It was the sound of reinforcements coming. However, it was not Deku who made the announcement. Mr. Aizawa's voice echoed throughout the testing grounds. The villain team has called in their enforcer. Reinforcements inbound, he said. In an instant, the ground began to shake. An explosion followed afterward with a large burst of dust emerging from the city. A moment earlier, as much as he hated to admit it, Bakugo was slowly losing the fight. Sure, they trained together on numerous occasions, especially with Uraraka in the mix. Bakugo knew about Midoriya's new tricks and even kept up with his new limit of 55%. However, speed and stamina combined were a deadly weapon against the foe villain. Midoriya's movements were becoming blurred to Bakugo. He didn't reveal his shoot-style attacks until the last minute, and he stopped announcing his attacks before executing them, keeping the explosive foe villain at bay. Midoriya even fired compressed air shots at his opponent whenever there was an opening, though the blasts were not just one at a time. For maximum efficiency, the young inheritor fired roughly 3 shots whenever possible. Truly, he was gaining the upper hand, and Bakugo hated that. Bakugo fired a quick blast at point blank and leaped away for a quick moment. His breathing was getting heavier, and his head and hands were starting to ache. He had one final ace up his sleeve, and he needed to be fast. He pressed his hand against his pants pocket and felt the flash drive Deku gave him. He could call in an enforcer and turn the battle's tide, but that would be admitting that he couldn't handle Midoriya. He could use his injuries from the battle with Shigaraki as an excuse, but was that heroic? He groaned. He hated the option, but it was the only one he had left. He grabbed 2 grenade canisters from his belt and flung them at where Midoriya was. The young inheritor had no time to recover as the 2 exploded at his feet, granting Bakugo the one change he needed. With a smokescreen, the foe villain blasted off toward the roof of the building where they met. Scaling up the building with incredible speed, the foe villain made it to the console in little time. Of course, he had to act fast as Midoriya could make it to him faster than he did. He ran to the console with the flash drive in hand and inserted it into its port. The screen lit up with a simple command, "Enter password." Bakugo groaned as he remembered Deku explaining the password to him. He typed it in as he heard the young inheritor land on the roof behind him. With Midoriya right behind him, the foe villain slammed on the enter key and smashed the red button next to it. The alarm blared throughout the training arena. He expected to hear Deku announce the call. Instead, he heard Mr. Aizawa make the call. The villain team has called in their enforcer. Reinforcements inbound. With that announcement, the 2 young heroes to be felt the building shake. Bakugo didn't know of any teachers that could make an earthquake, except possibly 𝗂𝗵𝗲. An explosion followed the rumbling, and from the rooftops, the 2 young heroes saw a single object shoot into the air and arc toward them. Midoriya's eyes widened as he felt the sharp pain of danger sense, telling him to move. He and Bakugo leaped off the building as the object slammed down on the roof and crushed the building. The building lurched back and crumbled into a massive pile of rubble and dust. Midoriya stayed floating in the air as Bakugo landed next to him. The young inheritor gripped the side of his head as the pain continued to stab at him. It was as if Himiko Toga was getting her wish and driving her knife into his head. As the dust started to settle, they saw a figure emerge from the rubble. The figure was tall and fairly bulky. His hair was familiarly short and faded, with more hair on top than the sides. A pair of light blue eyes lit up from the dust, and for some reason, this caused Midoriya to drop on the ground. He felt his pulse quicken, and his breathing was short and shallow. I feel terrified. What's going on? He thought to himself. The bulky man approached the 2, and once he emerged from the dust, the 2 were stunned. The blue eyes belonged to Deku's goggles, along with a new version of his classic respirator. He wore a black, skin-tight sleeveless shirt underneath a sleeveless denim jacket with multiple patches all over it. His sleeveless jacket revealed even more scars running down both of his arms, along with a faint branch of purple at his right armpit. His forearms were wrapped by 3 of Mei Hatsume's weighted bracers with fingerless gloves. He wore a beige pair of cargo pants with shin-high black combat boots. Inside the observation room, everyone looked stunned. Is that? Mina couldn't finish as she was left speechless. That's Deku. He looks so jacked. Kirishima bellowed. He has more scars on his arms, ribbit. Those muscles didn't look that big before. Hagakure blurted out. Damn, he's really hitting the gym in the future? Kaminari wondered. Mr. Aizawa's eyes widened. Problem child. What in the world happened to you? He muttered. Deku stood straight and eyed Midoriya. So, you're the hero causing us trouble, eh? Deku said, his voice muffled from his respirator. Before he could respond, Deku closed the gap between them and blasted the young hero in the stomach with an uppercut, sending him flying through the air. He crashed into the window of a nearby building and settled in a pile of office equipment. 𝗧𝗪𝗪 gulped as he glanced at the enforcer he just unleashed. Oh shit. When a villainous-looking Deku arrived on the scene and sent Midoriya flying in the blink of an eye, it shocked everyone in the observation room. Abigail Winters, the medic on duty, groaned as she could feel the pain she would be taking from him when the match would end. Recovery Girl only sighed, and she shook her head at the display. Mr. Aizawa's eyes were wide, and he covered his mouth to hide the shock he was making. On the other hand, Snipe wasn't as easy to read as the others, but he was just as flabbergasted as the other staff, except for Principal Nezu. He hid a small smirk when he felt the rumbling come, and when he saw Deku appear, his smirk only grew in size. Well, it looks like he went and did it, he commented. Excuse me, Principal Nezu, Mr. Aizawa commented, but did you know he was going to be out there? The principal nodded. He had the weights brought up from the support department before the rest of the class arrived. As the principal, I needed to know what he was planning so I could approve it for the students, he said. Though, if I'm frighteningly honest, I fear that Deku isn't in the same level as All Might was during last year's final exam. For better or worse, All Might wondered. Principal Nezu eyed the screen and watched as Deku floated to where Midoriya landed. That, I fear, I do not know. As Deku touched down in the building, he scanned the room for his opponent. He moved with an aura of power that suggested just how committed he was to the villain enforcer's role. He tossed aside the debris from the crash landing and found where his opponent had landed. The spot where Midoriya landed was cleared of rubble. The young inheritor's mask was torn and left behind, as well as part of his Air Force gloves. Deku looked around the impact point and took a deep breath. I didn't think that heroes were cowards, he taunted the young hero. Though I will admit, I am hoping to see more of you before I beat you. Deku kicked away the fragments of a desk and wandered around the area. Don't think you can hide forever. I have my ways of finding you, boy. Shrouded in the shadow behind a concrete pillar in the corner of the room was the young inheritor. He braced his back against the post while using float to stay out of his field of view. Midoriya kept a hand over his mouth as he fought to control his breathing. The terror he felt was still lingering, though he couldn't place why it felt so strong. Deku approached Midoriya's hiding spot while he continued his search. You are proficient in hiding, though. Finding you won't be as easy as I thought it would be, he admitted. Midoriya took a deep breath and sighed through his nose. But if I can't find you, then perhaps your partner will be easier to find and entertain me, Deku continued. I can probably have my fun with those hostages, too, while I'm at it. Midoriya's eyes widened. He lowered his hand and powered up full cowling. He peeked out at his older counterpart and prepared to strike. He slipped out of his hiding spot while Deku had his back toward him, kicked off the wall, and readied his signature kick. With one for all on his side, he didn't make a peep as he rocketed toward his opponent. The young inheritor swung his leg, expecting his attack to connect and daze the enforcer. However, Deku's instincts were faster than he thought. The enforcer spun around and raised his arm to block Midoriya's attack effortlessly. Midoriya's eyes widened as he swung another kick to his opponent's other side, only for the enforcer to stop it as well. Frustrated, Midoriya launched a series of alternating kicks at his opponent. Using float, he stayed in the air and poured as much energy into his attacks as possible to increase their speed. As his kicks continued to meet his opponent's blocks, the shockwaves from each impact started to take their toll on the building. The remaining glass windows started to crack, and the floor they were on was started to shake as if an earthquake was happening. One of Midoriya's kicks missed Deku completely, allowing the enforcer to end their struggle. He moved outside of the young inheritor's range and grabbed his extended leg. Deku swung his heroic opponent and threw him out of the building, sending him into the driver's seat of a box truck. 𝗧𝗪𝗪 watched nearby with his eyes wide. Inside the truck, Midoriya shook off the broken glass that had rained down on him only for him to leap through the windshield. He cleared the truck as Deku smashed feet first into the cargo hold portion of the vehicle, crushing it down the middle. As the young inheritor leaped away from the wreckage, he glanced over at 𝗧𝗪𝗪. His shocked expression turned into a smirk, and his eyes focused on the truck. Hurry up and make that quirk your own. I want to beat you with everything you got. I'll be the next #1 hero, he remembered him saying on Nabu Island. Could this be a blessing in disguise? No way my future self didn't see this coming. Unless, he landed near 𝗧𝗪𝗪 and braced himself in a defensive fighting stance. Midoriya focused on the wreckage with his guard raised, looking for any sign of movement from his future self. He watched the crushed truck start to move. The creaking of metal and the crunching of glass gave way to the enforcer stepping out of the wreckage, much like a Terminator stepping through a roaring inferno and focused on its prey. When Deku emerged from the wreckage fully, he trained his sights on Midoriya. He started to stretch and shake his legs loose as he approached his opponent. You're getting faster with each day that passes. Soon you'll definitely match All Might's top speed. You'll even surpass it if you keep training, he said. Midoriya smiled and assumed his battle stance. I can't count on Kaken rushing in and helping me. Then again, I doubt he would pass up the opportunity to fight someone stronger than All Might. He's using his speed to keep me on my toes. But he isn't using his other quirks. I can use Black Whip to keep him at a distance. Spreading his arms out, the young inheritor powered up to the point where Black Whip was usable. Time to put that training to use. One for all, full cowling. Deku started to move toward the hero. 55%. Deku vanished in the blink of an eye, prompting Midoriya to move quickly. He leaped into the air and lashed out the Black Whip. The attack struck the ground where he stood, barely missing Deku as he reappeared. When the attack failed, the enforcer locked onto his target and flew into the air to counter. The young inheritor used a Delaware smash to blast himself out of his reach as Deku reappeared. He flew backward down the street and used Black Whip to snag a mock sedan. Readjusting himself, he swung the car around and slammed it into his future self. The older hero didn't register the maneuver until he felt the cool metal slam into his face. The attack force sent him flying into an office building, where we burst through several walls before swinging his legs out and skidding to a halt. With his eyes on the prize, the enforcer blasted off back through the building and slammed into the young inheritor. Midoriya flew through the air and slammed into a brick wall. While Deku's counterattack wasn't strong enough to send him through the building, the impact did wake up the young inheritor. He slid to the ground and fell over a set of trash cans. 𝗏𝗃𝐻 watched as the enforcer landed in front of him and slowly approached his younger counterpart. I suppose that our time is up. It's such a shame, really. You showed such promise. Deku taunted his younger self as he got closer. The villains will simply watch as I clean up their mess. Midoriya looked up to see Deku approach him. Reactivating full cowling, the young inheritor sped off toward his opponent with his fist primed for an uppercut, as Deku readied himself to counter quickly. He felt his head give him a little prick. He turned around just in time to see 𝗏𝗃𝐻's red-hot hand press against him and explode, sending a massive shockwave throughout the city block. The young inheritor watched as Deku's goggles flew off and settled nearby. The hero was about to meet up with his class rival when he stopped and turned back to the goggles. They were a plain pair of triangular goggles that clipped onto the respirator. Using Black Whip, he snagged the goggles and leaped over to 𝗏𝗃𝐻. The explosive faux villain was smiling wide as he surveyed his handiwork. The smoke was still pretty thick when he backed away after the attack. I doubt that did much, but damn, that felt so good. Midoriya settled next to him. Kaken, check this out, he said, handing him the goggles. 𝗏𝗃𝐻's smile faded as he eyed his rival. TCH, so what? It's just his goggles, he noted. Yeah, but they were blue earlier. This is just a plain old pair of glasses with a weird shape, Midoriya said. And, where was the blue light coming from? 𝗏𝗃𝐻 eyed the goggles and let the question linger for a moment. He grabbed the glasses and tossed them around, looking for anything that could answer his question. There were no lights on the other side of the frames, nor were there any battery packs or other power sources that made them blue. What the hell? He wondered. The smoke in front of them began to clear, and Deku's silhouette appeared. He was hunched over with his arms dangling under him. His back was turned to the duo, prompting 𝗏𝗃𝐻 to toss Midoriya the goggles. Enough chit-chat. You stand back and watch me fight him. If he's the #1 hero in the future, I have the perfect chance to fight him. You, at your peak. Yeah, because you defeated All Might last year, Midoriya retorted sarcastically. Remind me to bash your head into a wall later, 𝗏𝗃𝐻 grumbled. Noted. As the smoke continued to fade, more of Deku's villain costume became clear. He shook his head and straightened up with his back still toward the duo. At that moment, Midoriya doubled over, clenching his head as he felt his eyes roll into his head. He screamed in pain, causing 𝗏𝗃𝐻 to look over and grab his opponent. Deku, Midoriya clenched his eyes shut as the sharp pain continued to take its toll on him. Danger sense. What's going on? He wondered. 𝗏𝗃𝐻 looked up at Deku. He hadn't moved to fight them. Deku, what the hell? Something's wrong. I can't tell what it is. 𝗏𝗃𝐻 helped Midoriya straighten up and the two locked onto Deku. The enforcer turned toward them with his eyes shut. He walked through the smoke and reappeared in all of his glory to the two. You should not have done that, Dynamite. If you wanted me as your opponent, then you should have made sure that attack was powerful enough to put me down, he advised. 𝗏𝗃𝐻 smiled. Like I would pass up the chance to fight you at your best. Come on, all of those techniques, he faltered as he remembered that the rest of the class was watching and possibly listening. I want you to use them all. Deku smiled. I signed on to fight as an enforcer on the condition that I only use one technique besides my strength. You won't be leaving here satisfied, he said. Midoriya felt a chill run down his spine. That didn't sound good, he thought. But, if you want to fight me, then I'll oblige. Your partner needs to retrieve the hostages and lock them back up to win, Deku said. 𝗏𝗃𝐻 readied his quirk by creating small explosions in his palms. Midoriya straightened himself out fully and activated full cowling, ready to fight. All Deku did was relax his smile and open his eyes. The result was, in a single word, terrifying. The duo suddenly felt small and weak against an impossible world. Their blood ran as cold as ice, and their entire body seized up. Their joints locked up. Their hearts raced beyond where they were just moments ago. The sensation felt too familiar to Midoriya as he felt himself feel like screaming. Recovery Girl readjusted the cameras back in the control center so they wouldn't be facing Deku head-on. Even most of the faculty, the class behind her, were all stunned at what was going on. The only ones who weren't so surprised were Principal 𝗍𝗂 and All Might. They watched with different expressions, however. Principal 𝗍𝗂 looked on in wonder at the future symbol of peace. His mind was racing with questions regarding the hero that once wielded such a remarkable quirk. All Might, however, was feeling the exact opposite. He shook his head as he stared at the screen. Young Midoriya, what on earth? Sato was the first among the students to say something. So, who else saw that coming? Bakugo blasting Deku? Kaminari asked. The sugar-themed hero nodded. Everyone raised their hands, including the faculty. I feel like Deku knew it would happen too, Mina noted. I wonder why they aren't doing anything, though. If anything, they're probably sizing him up. Those two took down 9, so I bet they're coming up with a strategy, Kirishima said. Too bad we can't hear them until they use the radio, Gyro said. Recovery Girl nodded. As they should by now. The game has changed for both sides now. Everything depends on Miss Yaoyorozu and Miss Uraraka, she said. The sooner the game finishes, the better. All Might nodded. He glanced over at Mr. Aizawa. He tapped him on the shoulder and leaned in to whisper to the Erasure hero. You'll have to train young Midoriya with this ability soon, he whispered. Mr. Aizawa nodded and leaned back. He looked back at the screen and sighed. Damn it, problem child. The two rivals couldn't help but stare at their enemy and his new, electric blue eyes. Unlike his natural green eyes, which showed compassion and personal strength, these eyes were the living embodiment of terror. Neither of the two could move a muscle in their bodies as Deku slowly approached them. You two look as stiff as a steel beam. What happened to that courage earlier? He taunted. I don't understand. I can't move at all. It feels like when I saw. Wait a minute. All for one. It feels like when we went to save Kaken, and we saw All for One. Midoriya thought. Damn it. I can't move. What the hell did Deku do to me? Bakugo wondered. Deku removed the respirator and smiled. Gentlemen, say hello to Paralystair. This little beauty is the quirk of the first inheritor of One for All. This is the younger Shigaraki's successor, he said. The two didn't respond, prompting him to continue. His name is lost to history, I'm afraid. Even within the core of One for All, he doesn't want to be named, but his story is good. Of course, I'll tell it to you later when Uravity recaptures the hostages. For now, though, Deku charged at them. Bakugo shot daggers as he watched the enforcer get closer. He was lucky that his right hand was still open before he was frozen. And when Deku got close enough, he fired his quirk. The explosion wasn't strong enough to do any damage. However, his hold over them broke as he shielded his eyes from the blast. As he turned away, Midoriya saw his chance and powered up to 55%. The whole class watched as the young inheritor connected a rising uppercut to his older self's stomach, making him double over. Bakugo was close behind his rival with both hands cupped together and moving in a rising arc. Die, he bellowed as he let loose another explosion at point-blank range. Following the explosion was an attack of Midoriya's. He slipped by Deku and leaped away. He spun to face his older else and fired his black whip at him, grabbing him by the back. With a mighty pull, Midoriya flung his older self through an abandoned building. Deku came out on the other side and slammed into a parked 18-wheeler. With the dust settled, Midoriya sighed. He pulled out his phone and typed away for a little bit before initiating a group call. With the right settings, he pressed against the communicator in his ear. Free Uravity, come in. On the other side of the facility, the two young women were standing apart from each other with obvious battle wounds on both of them. Uraraka's hair was a mess, and her improved helmet had disappeared. There were tears on her costume and evidence of bruising on the exposed skin. Yaoyorozu's signature ponytail was undone, and there were scratches and bruises all over her body. The two were panting heavily when the call came in. Deku, Yaoyorozu wondered. What's going on? Deku, what are you doing? We have to end the test now. The villain enforcer is my older self. He's tearing the city apart, Midoriya urgently declared. To be fair, you're the one who sent him through a hotel, Bakugo retorted. Whatever. Anyway, he is attacking the both of us, and if he finishes us off, he'll be coming for you too as well, the young inheritor reported. Why would he? He's on our team, Uraraka wondered. Ask Kaken about that one. The two young heroes sighed. Ask a stupid question, they said in unison. You guys have to make a decision and end the simulation to stop him. It took a lot from us to even slow him down. An explosion in the background of the call severed the connection before either young hero could say anything. The two locked eyes for a moment before another explosion rocked the building. The two ran towards the window to see a massive gap in the skyline and a plume of smoke coming from the area. Yaoyorozu's communicator beeped. She turned away for a moment and answered the call. This is 𝗂𝐬𝐷. Ma'am, we heard there is a villain enforcer in the area. We need to evacuate now, the robot president urged her. Stay put, Madam President. I'm on my way, 𝐒𝐻𝐃 said before hanging up. She looked up to see 𝗂𝗧𝗏 staring out the window. I think we have a dilemma on our hands. Huh. The anti-gravity foe villain nodded. I can't count on our enforcer to not attack me, as much as I want to see him in action. Ending this simulation is necessary, she said. 𝐻𝐢𝐳 nodded. So here are our choices. We either escort the hostages to the exit gates, or you capture them and me. Of course, you would have to bring us all back here, and we don't know how long they have left, she explained. 𝗂𝗧𝗏 pursed her lips. 𝗵𝘃𝗀's gonna kill me for this, she mused. She looked up at 𝗂𝗧𝗏. Hero, I surrender. Get me out of here before that raging enforcer comes and kills us. 𝗂𝗧𝗏 hid a growing smile by covering it with her hand. She coughed and shook her head, desperate to shake away the feeling of amusement. Okay, villain. Your heinous deeds have come to an end. 𝗂𝗧𝗏 was barely successful in suppressing her laughter at the face her friend made. 𝗂𝗧𝗏's stern glare at the villain only fueled her desire to laugh as she stomped on the ground. She shook her head and looked away to the amusement of the everything hero. Seeing her chance, 𝗂𝗧𝗏 created a pair of 𝐒𝐻𝐻 glasses. You will cease your laughter at once and come with me. Heroism is no joke. The two girls lost it at that moment. 𝗂𝗧𝗏 had tears in her eyes as she staggered over to 𝗂𝗧𝗏. The two walked down the stairs and headed to the hostages. While Midoriya successfully warned the girls, he and 𝗵𝘃𝗀 were hopelessly outmatched when Deku returned to the scene. The villain enforcer returned in the blink of an eye and slammed into Midoriya, sending him through two parked cars. 𝗵𝘃𝗀 didn't have time to register the enforcer's attack before he felt himself soar through the air like a bullet. When he settled, Midoriya leaped into the air and grabbed onto the two cars using Black Whip. When Deku arrived to finish off his younger self, he was met with several thousand pounds of metal slamming into him. The force of Midoriya's twin hammer strike slammed the enforcer into the ground and embedding him into a crater. While still in the air, the young inheritor threw the cars on top of him in hopes of burying him for a few moments. The few moments turned into a few seconds as the enforcer blasted the cars off of him. Deku brushed off the dust on his jacket and charged at his younger self. Deku didn't have a chance to counter Midoriya's surprise attack before 𝗵𝘃𝗀 came flying in with an explosion to his face. The attack sent the enforcer in a different direction, slamming him into a nearby building wall. 𝗵𝘃𝗀 adjusted his course and blasted off to continue his assault. Deku swung his arm and knocked the explosive foe villain away. Midoriya sped in and jammed his fist into the enforcer's stomach as 𝗵𝘃𝗀 flew through the air. The sudden attack sent Deku doubling over and gasping for air. The explosive foe villain readjusted his flight path and blasted Deku in the face. Midoriya grabbed Deku by the undershirt and tossed him away as 𝗵𝘃𝗀 blasted off in the opposite direction. He placed one hand over the other and flashed a wicked smile. 𝗳𝗍𝗃𝗀 AP autocannon. The enforcer readjusted in midair when the first of 𝗵𝘃𝗀's attacks hit him. Midoriya sighed and rushed into attack while the autocannon sent smoke and ash into the air. Midoriya felt his entire body lock up before he could get close, and his pulse suddenly skyrocketed. He tripped on his own 2 feet and slammed into the ground face first. 𝗵𝘃𝗀 was next when he felt his explosions start to falter. He fell to the ground, frozen in his attack's pose. When the smoke cleared, Deku emerged with his denim jacket nearly destroyed. His undershirt was torn in a few places, including his right shoulder. Recovery Girl zoomed in on the spot and gasped when she saw a jagged purple mark underneath. All Might got a closer look at the mark, and his eyes widened. That's. Recovery Girl turned to him and placed a finger to her lips. The look in her eyes was clear. Later, as Deku approached them, Midoriya struggled to find his feet. He could move his arms, however. Each arm felt like it was filled with lead. He slid his legs under his body and pushed himself up. 𝗵𝘃𝗀 watched him overcome the effects of the quirk, drawing Deku's attention. When he saw him standing up, Deku's eyes widened, and Paraly's stare shut off. Without the quirk suppressing him, Midoriya spun on his heel and delivered an uppercut to the enforcer's stomach. Midoriya used Black Whip to grab onto him and throw him down the street as he doubled over. 𝗵𝘃𝗀 smiled as he blasted into the air. Once he was far enough, 𝗵𝘃𝗀 changed course and started to blast around him, creating a tornado as he spun at incredible speeds. Deku landed safely when he saw him coming in. Howitzer. Impact. Deku's eyes widened as 𝗵𝘃𝗀 connected the attack, sending a massive shockwave throughout the arena. The attack sent plumes of smoke and ash into the air, causing Midoriya to bury his face into the crook of his elbow. The explosion rocked the observation room. Everyone inside was handing on as the building rocked them all to the ground. When the shaking stopped, Mina had to push herself off of Kirishima, who was redder in the face than his hair. He shook his head before accepting the acid-throwing hero's help and rose to his feet. With everyone okay, Snipe spoke up first. That's definitely gotten stronger than before, he said. Abigail Winters, who was behind the rest of the class, nodded. I'm really thankful you guys forgave me for those QICDs earlier this year. That would have put a serious dent in Project Zero P, she said. Sato nodded. Damn, you think Deku survived that? I hope so. Your Araka would be pissed if her future boyfriend died here, 𝗧𝗪 commented. Recovery girl nodded. It's a good thing there's a heart monitor in all of your suits. Don't worry, everyone is all right, she said. Wait, what? Gyro exclaimed. We have heart monitors. Oh yeah, it makes it easier to keep track of all of you medically. Deku decided to turn them on for this exercise too. Wait, so where's mine? Mina wondered, patting herself down for any sign of a device. More importantly, where's 𝗷𝗵𝗲? Consult your updated hero uniform instruction booklet. It explains where the device is. Don't worry, males installed the devices in male costumes, and women installed them in women's costumes, Principal Nezu said. The acid-throwing young hero made a mental note to go over her costume later. She had an idea of where to check but was neither the time nor place to be sure. As the smoke began to clear, Midoriya fanned the area near his face. He looked around the area and sighed in relief. Some of the surrounding buildings' windows were completely shattered, and at least 2 buildings were completely leveled. All traffic and street lights were ripped from their sockets and embedded into some of the surviving buildings. There were no cars in sight. All in all, he was lucky to have evacuated the area when he did. The thick cloud of smoke around the impact point began to dissipate. As it did, Midoriya's eyes widened. The camera linked to the observation room revealed the sight before he could see it clearly. Deku was still standing. His posture was rigid and strong. A small pool of blood had appeared underneath Bakugo, who was limp in the air. He stopped it. He caught Kakin at the moment of impact and suppressed the explosion. The shockwave. Bakugo yelped in pain. His right arm was completely purple, and he hung from Deku's outstretched grasp. There were hardly any scratches on the enforcer as he smiled at the young inheritor. Nice try, but I think that was all he had. He tossed the faux villain to the ground. Deku stepped over him and approached Midoriya. Now then, let's finish this. Midoriya backed away for a second, and when his eyes fixed on Bakugo, he shook his head. I'm not giving up. Deku stopped his approach. I'm going to win this. I will defeat you. At 55% of one for all. I am you of the future, Izuku. I know where your limits are in this time because I lived it. Midoriya smiled. So, just like I promised Sir Night-Eye. Full cowling reactivated instantly, sending a shockwave in the area. Deku's eyes widened as he saw Midoriya's transformation. His hair didn't spike up as it did before. However, his hair was lighter and flowing in the wind. His sleeves tore away in the transformation, leaving him with his forearms exposed. I will smash that future. One for all. Full cowling 65%. Deku smiled as he formed a battle stance. You're past your limits. Let's see if you can make use of it. The two Midoriyas smiled at each other. The cameras watching them barely had time to adjust as the two slammed into each other at incredible speeds. In the 200 years since quirks were first introduced, technology had to evolve to keep up with the rapidly changing times. Support gear is a prime example to start with. This technology evolved from simple armor and amateur listening equipment to space-age technology, capable of acting at the drop of a hat. The capabilities of the standard camera also improved, especially with the arrival of high-speed quirks and individuals. With heroes like All Might shattering speed records, the best cameras in the world needed to have the technological capabilities to capture action shots. With luck and the right camera, a picture of Golden Age All Might moving faster than the blink of an eye is possible to catch. In UA, these cameras were used as the school's surveillance drones. These very drones followed the battle between the two Midoriyas. The arena shook as the two clashed at high speeds. Midoriya, using float and the combat skills he learned while training with Uraraka, alternated between punches and kicks against the enforcer. A double shoot-style attack at the ribs and the head transformed into a low to mid-rising hook punch. Deku toughed out the attacks and raised his guard as his younger self fired off rapid-fire punches. The enforcer broke his own guard, sending a small shockwave that stunned Midoriya. At that moment, Deku grabbed Midoriya by the back of his head and slammed his knee into his gut, knocking the air from his lungs. Deku followed up with a sweeping strike to the head, sending the young inheritor flying into the lobby of an abandoned hotel. Learning from his older self, Midoriya used small flicks of air to steady and reorient himself in the air. He floated just a few inches off the ground, and using a dual Air Force-type smash, propelled himself away from where Deku appeared. The enforcer had tried to use his speed to his advantage by landing a strike while moving faster than the young hero could see. Midoriya vaulted over the reception desk and pushed off it, so he flew to the overhead balcony. Just in time, too, as Deku smashed the desk he was just at. Midoriya smiled as he assumed a battle stance. Deku appeared in front of him and sped into his opponent, slamming into him with a powerful shoulder charge. The attack caught the young inheritor off guard as he was sent flying through the hotel's wall, sending him into another building. This time, he wasn't quick enough to reorient himself before slamming into the floor. While the fight was going on, the remaining young students of Tua watched from the control room. Everyone was glued to their seats and stared at the screen, processing the fight as it was happening. Jirō rubbed her eyes before speaking up. So, did he get faster all of a sudden? She wondered. Doesn't he have a limit? Kaminari exclaimed. Well, he hasn't broken any bones yet, Mina commented. Keyword being yet here, Kirishima said. I'm still reeling from the fact that he stopped Bakugo's howitzer like that. Behind him, Abigail was rubbing her right arm. That'll be a bitch and a half to heal, she said. That was brutal. Who would have thought Midoriya would be that strong? Shoji said. Principal Nezu passed a glance at All Might. The former #1 hero looked away from the animalistic principal. If he had control of that power last year, the League of Villains would not have taken Bakugo. Imagine that, Tokoyami said. The strongest hero out of all of us was in last place last year. Hagakure chuckled. Who would have thought? I can't remember what I thought Yua was going to be like before the first day. I can't remember either, Sato commented. Mr. Aizawa smiled. I'm happy to hear that you all have improved so much in the last year. Keep pushing yourselves to newer heights, he advised. Yes, sir. Back on the battlefield, Midoriya was now on the run. With one for all on his side, the young inheritor was able to keep himself mobile by constantly moving out of Deku's reach at the last moment. Moving with grace typically seen with acrobatic club members, Midoriya leaped out of range by either pushing away with an arm planted on the ground or using his feet. Using his feet to move allowed him to gain more ground while using his hands to make tighter turns if necessary. As Midoriya moved with grace, Deku continued to smash the ground wherever his younger self was. Each strike was an explosion that closely resembled Bakugo's. Debris and smoke would be sent into the air as they moved. Midoriya would occasionally leap into the air and grab onto a vehicle using Black Whip with his speed on his side. In one instance, he grabbed onto a box truck and spun in the air, catching Deku off guard as it slammed into him, sending him crashing hard onto the street. As they kept moving, Midoriya made an effort to avoid Bakugo's resting spot in the villain lair where Yaoyorozu and Uraraka were. If he found himself going in either direction, a quick maneuver with Black Whip corrected that mistake. He fired a series of Delaware smashes at his opponent to keep him focused on catching the young hero. As they raced down one street, Deku decided that it was time to end their game, pouring an extra helping of one for all into his speed. The enforcer vanished in the blink of an eye and reappeared with his hand on Midoriya's face. He promptly slammed the young hero into the ground with a great amount of force. In the control room, All Might watched the live stream with wide eyes. Come on, young Midoriya. As the dust settled, Deku looked down on his younger self with Parley stare active. Submit, hero. Midoriya smiled as he looked up at his opponent. I won't. There are still people who are counting on me, he declared. Then surrender. Fight another day, young hero. Midoriya shook his head. I am not scared of you. I will keep going. Deku narrowed his eyes. He's already gotten used to Parley stare's effects. He already knows the feeling. Midoriya turned over his right hand at the enforcer. Deku realized at that moment that he was waiting patiently. Take this then. Delaware smash. With the flick of his finger, Midoriya blasted a column of air up at his opponent. Deku flew into the air, giving the young hero a moment to breathe. He used float to hover in the air and blasted away using his smash to propel himself. Deku reoriented himself just in time for Midoriya to jam his iron soul feet into his stomach, knocking the wind out of him. He then grabbed onto Deku's undershirt and pulled himself up, so he was on top of the enforcer's back. With his feet planted on the center of his back, Midoriya fired a twin Delaware smash at the air and sent the two on a crash course to the ground. As they got close, Midoriya used Black Whip to grab onto the roof of one of the tall buildings, sending Deku down on his own. The enforcer slammed into the ground with great force, sending debris and smoke into the air. Satisfied with his work, Midoriya leaped off of the building and used float to slow his descent. He eventually landed next to where Deku's crater was. He looked in to see his older self already on his feet. You're getting better, Izuku. Pretty soon, you can inflict lasting damage on someone like me, he said. Midoriya gulped. Until then, he raised his hand and fired a point-blank Delaware smash, sending the young hero through a nearby building. Deku stretched his arms and shook off Midoriya's earlier attack before he sped off to finish his work. When he arrived, Midoriya was still on his feet. The building he slammed into was a bank, and he was lucky enough to be stopped by the massive vault door that was still sealed. His uniform was beginning to look torn and dirty from all of the smoke sent into the air. Seeing his opponent still on his feet filled Deku with a sense of pride. Midoriya smiled as Deku entered the building. I am still not giving up, he declared. Deku laughed. You do know that defeating me is pointless for the exam. You don't win when I'm taken down, he said. Midoriya nodded, his smile still persistent. I know. We win when we get the hostages to safety. Deku's eyes narrowed at his younger self. Since there was no physical indication that enhanced senses was active, the enforcer activated enhanced hearing to find that Midoriya's earcom was emitting static. His eyes widened as he turned to the massive hole he made. Wait a minute. The alarm blared throughout the arena. The hero team successfully escorted the hostages to safety and captured the villain. Hero team wins. Deku hunched over, his jaw hanging low. He stayed like this for a few minutes before his shocked expression turned into a chuckle and a sly smile. He turned to his younger self and approached him. With an extended hand, he helped Midoriya to his feet. "You got me good," he said. Midoriya smiled as he braced himself on the small piece of a desk. "I didn't think you would stay distracted for so long," he admitted. "It's a good thing that I didn't stay down all of those times." Deku laughed. "Consider this. I don't have anyone in the future I can train with that can keep up with me. I had a little too much fun here," he said. The two Midoriyas chuckled for a little bit before they left the room. "Come on, Katsuki is probably pissed at me for leaving him in the dust like that," Deku said. Midoriya stopped for a minute. "Katsuki, you don't call him Kakin anymore." Deku smiled. "The change will be worth it, now come on." Once the QICDs were returned to their holding cells and the girls were brought in for heals, Deku arrived with Midoriya and Bakugo with him. The two were able to walk, regardless of their injuries. Midoriya had Bakugo's good arm over his shoulder as they arrived at the facility. The young inheritor sat Bakugo down at Abigail Winter's makeshift medic tent where the young lady in question was waiting. She and Recovery Girl stood by as Bakugo laid down on a cot. As Recovery Girl guided Abigail through the assessment process, Deku came up to him and pulled out a small, metallic tube from his pocket. The tube had a button at the top and a dispenser at the bottom. "Open up," he told the explosive hero. "Fuck you. You could have blasted my arm off," Bakugo retorted. "Hey, I know your explosions. You knew what I was about to do. And you dampened your howitzer's strength," Deku said. "Open up." Bakugo narrowed his eyes at the future symbol of peace. He begrudgingly opened his mouth, and Deku put the tube over his tongue. With the press of a button, a small pill popped out of the tube. "Chew and swallow. It's a healing stimulant that should make it easier for Abigail to heal you," he said. "It tastes like a 𝗵𝗃𝗏, Bakugo said. "Just swallow it." And he did. Deku turned to Abigail. "You shouldn't have too much of a problem with healing him," he told her. "I'll wait until we're all done before I give the final debrief." Midoriya nodded. "You might need one too, Izuku." He pulled a tablet into the young hero's hand. As the young hero popped his tablet, Abigail stood at Bakugo's head. With her hands on either side of his head, she breathed in a deep breath. "Ready? Just do it," Bakugo grumbled. Abigail rolled her eyes and activated her quirk. Cold mist seeped out from her hands and converged on the explosive hero's temples. The mist then descended his body like a waterfall. His injured arm and several other points throughout his body began to glow a brighter shade of gold. Abigail cried out and cursed. She felt his injury in his arm begin to form in her own body, as well as some bruising and cuts from the glass that must have rained down on him. As Bakugo's injuries healed, Abigail's body began to show signs of the fight. As quickly as the bruises and cuts formed, however, they quickly disappeared. Unlike the explosive hero's arm, Abigail's didn't turn purple. Once the healing process was done, the gold mist disappeared. Bakugo flexed his once injured arm and found that there was no pain. He groaned as he picked himself up and sat at the edge of the bed. "That's fucking weird," he said. Abigail nodded. 4 months later, and it still is. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a lollipop. "Have a lollipop for being a good sport about it." "Shove it," he commented. "I'm not into that." "Take it," she retorted. Deku snickered as Bakugo took the lollipop. He grumbled as they all left the makeshift tent. With Bakugo fully healed, the three of them entered the observation room. As soon as they entered the room, Uraraka jumped Midoriya and held on close with her hug. While the explosive young hero made it a point to gag loudly, Deku approached the whole class. Everyone was still in a buzz, and for a good reason. On the screen behind him was a montage of everyone's performance during the exercise. With the right music dubbed over it, it was an inspirational experience. He waved at all of the students while Snipe and Mr. Aizawa stood next to Deku. Principal Nezu climbed up Deku's back and rested on the back of his head. "Hello everyone. I can see you all are in high spirits," he announced. "Hell yeah, talk about a dramatic finish." Kirishima bellowed. "Yaomomo and Uraraka are MVPs for sure," Mina declared. "I had a lot of fun messing with you, Ribbit," Tsu said to Takoyami. "Your mucus is very potent," the Birdman responded. Deku smiled. Yaoyorozu had bumped fists with Todoroki and gotten a high five from Midoriya. Bakugo, meanwhile, was watching the highlight reel. He started laughing at Kirishima when he saw how he was captured. "You look like a pinata," he bellowed. "Awa, come on, don't be like that," Kirishima begged while Zero and Kaminari joined in with the laughter. Todoroki and Mina watched the group laugh, and both cracked smiles at seeing Bakugo enjoy himself. Deku, however, waved at everyone to simmer down. "Hey, everyone, I wasn't done yet." Everyone stopped. Deku sighed and continued. "I'm so glad you all enjoyed this exam. It wasn't like fighting robots or the pros from last year, and I'm glad we got to see some new dynamics on the battlefield. It goes to show you that you can and will be called on to help other heroes at a moment's notice, he started. Even though roughly half of you failed your objective, no one in here just gave up. You all gave it your best shot and found out that your opponents were a step ahead of you. There's nothing wrong with failure. The enforcers were meant to be a surprise, and I'm glad that they were called in. I'll be honest, though, I expected every team to call in their enforcer, but 2 calls are better than none in my book. You all were thrown into the battle with no idea of what to expect and still went for it. Great work, all of you. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 nodded and stood forward. Now, I have a couple of announcements before we let you all go. Firstly, your grades. You'll have your grades by 8 tomorrow morning. You will still be showing up to class in the morning, but it will only be homeroom. Second, you'll all be turning in your required training hours to me in class tomorrow. You have until 5 tonight to log them in before it's lights out in the gyms. You can still train outside of gym hours. Make sure you have either the class rep or the vice rep around to log them in. Thirdly, Class 2B will be coming in at noon to take their final exam. It'll be the same as what you did, but you are not to tell them anything. If you want to stay, you can get comfortable here, understand? Yes, sir. The class responded in unison. And finally, a special announcement. The rest of this week and the next 2 weeks are your summer vacation days. Since you all passed your provisional license exams, there is no special need to train. However, that doesn't mean you have no responsibilities until the autumn term rolls around. Deku here will be hosting a special 2-on-1 boot camp in the TDL. This is entirely optional to all of you. Sign-ups will be available at the end of next week. The 2-on-1 aspect of it is pretty simple. If you sign up, you will be paired with another one of your classmates. That decision will be mine alone, so don't expect to be training with your best friend, Deku said. Beyond all of that, you all have the next month and a half off from your academics. This will be your first summer in the dorms, so I hope you all stay safe and out of any trouble. The school will remain open so that you won't have any issues traveling to and from the dorms. Keep the curfew in mind, though, Principal 𝗧𝗪 said. The pool will be open to student use, with a proper heads up, of course. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 clapped once, earning everyone's attention. Class dismissed. Thank you, sir. Everyone turned and walked out the door. Only a few members of the class stayed behind, including 𝗵𝘃𝗀 and Kirishima. As Deku surveyed the room, his eyes locked on All Might, who stood at a set of doors leading out of the room. Principal 𝗧𝗪 leaped off of his head and walked out with All Might behind him. Mr. Aizawa patted him on the back. We need to talk about some things, he said. Deku nodded. The makeshift city, built mainly for training the next generation of heroes, had secret uses that the teachers knew about. For one thing, there was privacy. Not all of the rooms in all of the buildings were gutted and refurbished to withstand young quirks. Some rooms had temporary housing and secret lounge rooms for those teachers who needed a break from teenagers. Inside one of these rooms was a teacher's lounge, fitted with electricity, and the furnishings that would make it seem like someone lived in it. The couches looked fairly new. There were ample lighting and bright wallpaper that gave the room a warm and open feeling. With all of the teachers accounted for, everyone sat down around the room. Deku sat on the couch, facing everyone. I think we all know what's the topic going to be in here. Aizawa, 𝗧𝗵𝗲. We know, Mr. Aizawa stated. All Might filled in the details last year. A little heads up earlier in the year would have been nice. All Might smiled sheepishly. Anyway, we are all familiar with One for All and its rapidly changing nature. I think I speak for all of us when we have to wonder about the quirk you displayed today, Principal 𝗧𝗪 said. Deku nodded. Yeah, I figured you would all be put off about it. I'll be honest, I wasn't a fan of it myself when it first manifested, he admitted. Everyone seemed to lean in close. Parallel Stare is a powerful quirk stored within One for All. When All for One's brother realized the power of One for All, he trained it as much as he physically could. It wasn't enough, in the end, so he passed it on. To a hero, Principal 𝗧𝗪 asked. Deku shook his head. He passed it on to a villain. Specifically, a villain within All for One's inner circle, he said. All Might's eyes widened. But how is that possible? I figured that only heroes were given the quirk, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 mused. This was later. The younger brother knew that there were those in All for One's inner circle that doubted him. He even assigned an enforcer to watch over the younger Shigaraki so he couldn't cause trouble, but that backfired. The younger brother sought him out and passed One for All onto him, hoping to increase its power. And it worked. All of the heroes said nothing, letting him continue with the story. At the end of his life, the first to inherit the quirk struck his name from public records. He erased himself so no one would know his secrets. Even within One for All, he doesn't want to be named. I've only seen his face once, and that was enough, Deku explained. The quirk is a strange one to me. The power allows me to summon the fears that I have and projects them as energy through the eyes. The stronger the fear I summon, the stronger the fear I project, he said. He blinked, and his eyes appeared blue. The sensation only lasted for a moment before it disappeared, reverting his eye color to green. And it works with anyone? Mr. Aizawa asked. Deku shook his head. There are a lot of people who can overcome their fears. Izuku managed to overcome 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟 when I used it against him. My enemy, the Chaos King, cannot be stopped with this power. Between all of us, I've been working on fixing that. Mr. Aizawa raised a hand to his chin. Who do you use his power on? Rampaging villains, if possible. Petty thieves when they're trying to run. Sometimes, when I'm off duty and someone wants to try and start something dangerous, a quick flash of 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟 will make them jump and abandon their plans, Deku answered him. Principal Nezu nodded. Do you know when your younger self will activate the power? We can be ready to help him train with it when the time comes. Deku blushed and scratched the back of his head sheepishly. Well, it's funny when you say that. He actually unlocks the power soon. I'd say it's days from now, though it could be hours. Really, you remember the day well. Deku looked down, holding his head in his hands. It's a day that's burned in my memory. I'll never forget it. Was it bad? All Might asked. Deku started to laugh as he raised his head. Be bad? It was the most awkward day of my life, he admitted. All Might was curious now. What happened? Deku covered his mouth as he breathed in slowly. His face was burning red. Well, the faculty all leaned in. I accidentally activated it while sharing an intimate moment with your Uraraka. Oh God, Mr. Aizawa groaned. Yikes, you're right about it being awkward, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 said, pulling his hat down to hide his face. I feel like my master would have died of laughter if she wasn't already. All Might said. Young love at its finest, Principal Nezu commented. Deku shook his head. I accidentally used it on her, and she panicked. She didn't talk to me for a few days after that. I've had to start using a blindfold whenever we do. Those things, even when I go to sleep, he admitted. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 snorted inside his mask. Mr. Aizawa, for some reason, looked like he wanted to laugh. Nimari would have enjoyed hearing that, he said. She wouldn't let you live it down. Experience? Deku asked him. Mr. Aizawa responded with a middle finger raised. Anyway, I can train Midoriya to use 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟 when it comes up. Personally, I think you should do it since you're the one with the same quirk, the Erasure hero said. As for the others, Principal Nezu asked, after 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟 comes enhanced senses. The power will allow my younger self to instantly strengthen one of his 5 senses at the expense of others. Like I told 𝗧𝗵𝗏, with proper training, he could upgrade that limit to 2 senses. Neihatsu and Kyoka Gyro will help my younger self there since enhanced hearing and sight are their specialties. Present Mike won't be the best teacher for enhanced speech, but the help would be appreciated. As for touch and smell, Principal Nezu asked. Deku shrugged. Those are trial and error. My path might be different than his, though. I'll leave notes behind when I return to my time, he said. With that, that's wielder number 6. And with 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟 coming from the younger Shigaraki's successor, that leaves the 3rd quirk, the last one from an unknown user. All Might deduced. Mr. Aizawa glanced over at Deku. He didn't say anything about the user. So, the symbol of peace looked up. So, what? The 3rd user. Who was it? What quirk is it? Deku paused for a moment. He sighed and stood up. I'd rather not. Deku, this is important information for us. Any attempts to figure out the 2 unknown quirks and their users have failed for us. You're the only one who knows and could give us an advantage when it comes to training your younger self, Principal Nezu said. With all due respect, Principal Nezu, I refuse to give you all that information. The 3rd user's quirk is dangerous to use. It's even worse to witness. I've only used the power once, and I swore never to use it again. If my younger self unlocks it, then I hope he'll come to the same conclusion, he said. Hold on a minute, 𝗧𝗵𝗏 called out. Sir, I'm sorry. We came in here to discuss 𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗟, and that's it. Class 2B will be here soon, and we need to be ready. I'm sure Recovery Girl is waiting for us in the other room, Deku explained before he walked out the door, leaving the pros in the room. Principal Nezu stood up from his chair. Let's get going. The next exam awaits, he said. Sir, 𝗧𝗵𝗏 commented. What about Deku? Principal Nezu shook his head. We shouldn't push the subject any further. For now, we have a task that needs attending to. And besides, it sounds like our young hero went through an ordeal that turned him away from using the ability. He explained. Forcing it out of him will only make things worse. All Might sighed and stood up, allowing the fuzzy principal to climb his arm and rest on his shoulders. Let's get going. 𝗧𝗵𝗏 and Mr. Aizawa eyed each other before they also stood up and left the room. The next day, 𝗬𝗃𝗧𝗟𝗃, all of Class 2 shrieked with the collective power to rival Present Mike on a good day. They all stood outside of their classroom, where a corkboard was set up, and their scores were printed out on a sheet. The paper had a few columns beside the names of the students. The first column had their scores from the written exam, and all of them were above the minimum requirement to pass. Even those who struggled the year before were in shock when they saw how high they soared. The second column focused on the 2v2 final exam the day before. The column had their rankings based on their battle performance. 10 of them had success, and the rest of the class had failed. Team 1 and Team 5 were the only ones with enforcer in brackets. The third column had what caused the outcry. The column had the final grade from their battle. Despite 10 of them failing the objective, everyone had passed stamped. The final column had their final grade. And it was all pass in big, red letters. We all passed. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 walked by and saw them all crowding the board. Under his mask, he smiled as he placed a hand on 𝐒𝐬𝐺𝗀𝗧's shoulder. "I'd say congratulations are in order," he said to her. She turned to the Western pro hero. "But the mock battle. Some of us failed," 𝗵𝗲 complained. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 nodded. "Yes, you did. 10 succeeded and 10 failed," 𝗧𝗵𝗲 said. "But," 𝗧𝗵𝗲 laughed. "Ms. 𝐒𝐬𝐺𝗀𝗧, who told you that the mock battle was for a grade?" he asked her. The class was all quiet when he said that. "Inside, everyone," he called out to them, earning a proper response from everyone. As everyone shuffled into their seats, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 reached under his podium and pulled out a cardboard box. "I'll be taking the final roll call in a few moments. When I call your name, you'll be coming up and turning in your training log cards. Please be sure that your name is on it, so I know who did what. If you had training time outside of gym hours, be sure you have those hours logged, and a signature is present from either Ms. 𝐒𝐬𝐺𝗀𝗧 or Mr. Midoriya," he said. 𝗵𝗲 was the only one who panicked and scrambled for a pen. As 𝗧𝗵𝗲 sat down to let them all get sorted, the stun gun hero leaped at Midoriya for his signature. Uraraka chuckled as she watched him sign his name fluidly. In front of her, Ida looked at his training card. "It's so weird to have to ask them for a signature for my work," he muttered, reminiscing of the old days. "Ida?" Uraraka asked him. He nodded and set his card aside. "I'm proud of 𝐒𝐬𝐺𝗀𝗧 and Midoriya. They've been remarkable at leading the class. It makes me wonder how they would have performed last year," he said. "Hey, you did great last year," his anti-gravity friend said. "Although it would have been a nightmare for you if you found out about Deku and me back then." Ida chuckled. "It would have been a stressful week, to say the least." The two looked up to see 𝗵𝗲 repeatedly slapping Midoriya's back as he held his training log card. 𝐒𝐬𝐺𝗀𝗧 was signing Gyro's and Shoji's cards behind him. Once everyone was sure their cards were filled out, everyone stood up and turned them in. When all of their cards were turned in, 𝗧𝗵𝗲 put the box away. "Thank you, everyone. The next few weeks will be all yours, and you won't be assigned training cards for the term," he said. "Remember that Deku's summer boot camp is optional if you want to keep in shape until the next term starts. Now, just because the term is over, that doesn't mean you'll be running around and going crazy. This will be your first summer in the dorms, so I have some ground rules to lay down. Rule 1. The air conditioner units in each of the buildings are centralized, meaning the whole building is covered. Please don't leave it on throughout the day. It'll be unnecessary and expensive, so don't do it," he explained. Rule 2. If there are multiple people in a single room at a time, leave the door open unless the class rep or VP says different. Co-ed couples must adhere to these rules, understand? Midoriya and Uraraka found themselves looking away from 𝗧𝗵𝗲 as he eyed them. His mask hid that from the rest of the class. Rule 3. You still have a curfew. 10 in the evening to be on campus and 12 midnight to be in your assigned building. Adhere to lights out when prompted, and everything will be fine. And finally, notify staff if you are planning to spend more than 3 days away from the Heights Alliance. Your reps will be taking roll call in the mornings, and a heads up will make their job easier, understand? "Yes, sir," 𝗧𝗵𝗲 nodded. "Enjoy your summer break, everyone. Please be sensible and not do anything crazy. I don't want to start autumn term with someone pregnant or missing," he said. 𝗂𝐵𝗃 raised her invisible hand. "Has that happened before?" "Oh yes, it has. There's a reason why Recovery Girl has a stash of contraceptives in her office," he said. "Anyway, take care, everyone." With that, he grabbed the box under the podium and left the room. Everyone relaxed, and some leaned back in their chairs. "All right, summer vacation at last." 𝗵𝗲 cheered. "Sunshine and ice cream, here I come," Mina declared as she grabbed her book bag. "You doing anything, Madam Press?" 𝐒𝐬𝐺𝗀𝗧 smiled as she packed up her stuff. "Funny you should mention that." Midoriya smiled as he slipped his hero journal into his bag. "Midoriya and I were talking about what we should do to celebrate another successful term, and we got to thinking about how to celebrate." Mina and 𝗂𝐵𝗃 both slammed their hands on her desk. "𝗷𝗻𝗲, tell me you're about to say." The everything hero smiled. "There's a section of Takoba Beach that has fire pits. We were thinking about a small Tua beach party and BBQ," she said. Stars formed in Mina's eyes as her smile grew 3 sizes. "You are awesome," she shrieked, earning some of the guys' attention. Takoba Beach was Midoriya's idea. "Really?" 𝗂𝐬𝐺𝗀𝗧 mentioned. "Yeah, but I can't give him kisses for the idea," she said. Her smile persisted. "Fair enough," 𝗂𝐬𝐺𝗀𝗧 said as the acid-throwing hero jumped her and kissed her on the cheek repeatedly. "With no mind to bother us, I can feel comfortable wearing a swimsuit." "Same here, Ribbit. We're gonna need stuff for the fire pit, though. Firewood, a grill, utensils." Sato started going down the list. "We're also gonna need food to cook and chairs and blankets," Midoriya said. We'll do a supply run in a little bit while everyone gets ready. You and me, Sato wondered. And anyone else who can join in? Ada, I'm in. Gyro, Midoriya asked. I'm game, she said. And I'll help get everything ready at the dorms, Yaoyorozu said. Everyone started to voice their support for their outing. As they all left the room, they passed by Snipe and All Might talking in the hallway. Midoriya and Uraraka waved at the former pro hero as they left. With the students away from their meeting, All Might continued. He's working a case right now. Are you sure they said Takoba Beach? All Might wondered. Snipe nodded. I don't like the idea of having Midoriya under constant supervision, but with Tamura Shigaraki out there, I don't want to take any chances, he said. If anything, he's still keeping quiet to assess his strengths. He's not ready to strike at us again. All Might said. I know, but I don't want to risk anything. I'd go out there and keep an eye on them, but I have papers to go over, Snipe said. All Might nodded. I can try calling Deku and see if he can take some time to keep tabs on them. We need a backup just in case, though, he said as he pulled out his phone. What case is he even working on, anyway? It's not like he can register as a hero from the future, Snipe wondered. On the other side of the city, Deku was camped out behind a dumpster, watching a small group of men standing around an empty van. Wearing his hoodie and his respirator, he looked like a criminal stalking a group of unsuspecting workers. What saved him from being arrested were a few noticeable things. 1. The men waiting around were all wearing suits with the Chaos Star embroidered on the back. 2. Some of the men were holding rifles. And 3. The van was being loaded by real retail workers and held by gunpoint. It was a robbery in progress, and Deku had to break it up. With the merchandise loaded into the truck, Deku raised his hood and leaped into action. He grabbed 2 of the gang members by their collars and threw them into the open lids of the dumpster behind him. When the rest of the gang turned to see him, they raised their guns to fire. Instead of raining bullets, they were all frozen. Deku's perilous stare had enough power to freeze everyone in their own fears. The future symbol of peace smiled and calmly disarmed the criminals and pressed them on the ground. With zip ties in hand, he got to work arresting them. He started to whistle to the tune of Hero 2 as he worked. As he piled the criminals on top of each other, he shut off his quirk. So, you guys trained for Black Friday early, huh? Fuck you, Hero. The public doesn't want your kind anymore. One of them spat out. I'm pretty sure the public doesn't want their access to flat-screen monitors to disappear either. But hey, that's just me, he responded as he picked up a heavy-set thug with antlers coming out of his head. As he set the thug down, another gang member spoke up. Where were you when Endeavor got outed as Father of the Year? Huh? Were you by his side or what? He said. Deku sighed as he finished zip-tying the thugs. I was trying to keep one son from killing the other, he answered. You know, Tamura Shigaraki planned on ripping apart Hero Society. He succeeded. What have you done lately? He gruffed out. Deku moved to the dumpsters and grabbed the 2 thugs he threw in there and tossed them on the pile. You have no idea what I've been doing. But the tearing down of society won't solve any problems. You'll just be giving people like All For One and the Chaos King more power to rule over everyone else, he said. One of the thugs chimed in. Long live the king, he shouted. Deku rolled his eyes. Speaking of which, would any of you know where to find the Chaos King? I owe him a punch in the face, he said. The thugs all laughed. His skin is stronger than steel, Hero. You'd get nowhere with punching him in the face, one of them said. It's more therapeutic than productive, really. So, where is he? All of the thugs stayed silent, earning a groan from the symbol of peace. As he sorted all of the captured gang members, he turned away from them. Fine then, keep your secrets. I'll find him on my own. With the last of the thugs wrapped up like a Christmas present, Deku checked on the workers who were held at gunpoint. Are you all okay? He asked them, removing his respirator and hood. One of the employees nodded. Thanks for that, Hero. We're insured, but that still would have sucked if they just got away, she said. I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting anyone to show up, the other said. Deku nodded. You guys needed help. I wasn't going to sit idly by, he said. Still, thanks, the female worker said with a smile. The male worker passed by her and reached into the van. You were looking for someone. Deku nodded. Their boss. Have you called the police already? The manager already did, the female worker said. We just wait then. Yeah, I'll stay with you guys until they get here, just in case someone wants to try something, Deku said, aiming the last part of his comment at the pile of Discorder gang members. Hero Society will die. You sound like a broken record, Deku retorted. One of the gang members broke free from his restraints and charged at the hero. His fists and forearms grew big and turned bright red. The transformation made his arms resemble armor, and based on his knowing smile, it was exactly that. Your parlor tricks won't work on me, Hero. Now die. With a swing of his mighty gauntlets, the gang member threw a single punch. Unfortunately for him, Deku stopped the attack with one hand. The strike stopped dead by his defense, earning shocked expressions from everyone present. The gang member was the most surprised. His eyes were wide, and a chill ran down his back. He tried pushing against Deku's block. However, the young symbol of peace did not budge. Deku smiled as he lowered the gang member's arm. Transformation quirk, heavy armor gauntlets improve your strength, but it looks like it limits your mobility. Your punch speed would be better if you shadow boxed with the gauntlets activated, he said. The color scheme reminds me of the early comic book hero, Iron Man. Do you control the color, or is it natural? Shut up. The gang member grunted. If that's real metal, you could definitely be a tank hero. Your defense would be extraordinary. Damn, what a wonderful power, Deku said. The gang member blushed. Now, power down and sit with your friends. I don't really want to hurt you, he said. Taking his advice, the gang member powered down and sat on the ground. The other gang members were too stunned at his power to say anything to their comrade. With the threat neutralized, Deku turned back to the coworkers. You guys okay? He asked. Okay. Damn, that was awesome, the female worker exclaimed. Didn't even break a sweat. That punch must have been super strong. The male worker beamed. Oh, he hit hard, but if you can see the attack coming, it won't matter how strong you are, he said. Speed and strength are awesome combinations to have, and adding a good technique to the mix will certainly make combat better. But giving a villain that kind of advice, that's just asking for trouble, the female worker pointed out. Probably. But it's also important to respect others and the hard work they put into their craft. I've met plenty of villains in my time, and most of them aren't necessarily evil, just in a tough spot. The two workers smiled and sat at the building steps while Deku leaped onto the van's roof and relaxed. He pulled out his phone and noticed that he had a message waiting for him. All might, Deku, call me when you get this. He sighed and rang up the number. Hello, Deku. Oh good, it actually worked, the former pro said. Is everything alright? How did the kids like the surprise at the end? They feel deceived, but overall happy at their passing marks, he said. I need a favor from you. Of course. What is it? Most of the class are heading to Takoba Beach to celebrate the end of the term, and I still don't feel right letting them go without any backup. I was hoping you could shadow them just in case someone from the PLF tries something. Deku glanced at the two workers and then at the pile of Discorder gang members. When do they leave? In a few hours. Excellent. I have a report to file with the local PD, and when I'm done, I'll meet up with the class. Thank you, young man. All Might hung up right afterward. Pocketing his cell phone, Deku sighed. Of all the places in Japan, he muttered. Sir, are you okay? The male worker asked him. Deku smiled at them. Yeah, I just have an extra assignment to do later. It looks like it'll be a busy day, he said. The teens nodded and sat in silence for another moment. The sound of police sirens was closing in, and Deku jumped off the van and replaced his respirator and hood. With the proper report filed and his name cleared by the police, Deku left the local precinct and rendezvoused with Class 2A. The class had just arrived at the beach's parking lot with bags full of towels, 2 coolers full of ice and drinks, and other items one would bring to a beach hangout. With 𝐒𝐬𝐴 leading the way, they found their spot with little difficulty. Deku had swapped his hoodie for a black tank top, and situated on his head was a pair of dollar store glasses. His gauntlets had been replaced by 2 silver bands, one on each wrist. It took a moment for the class to recognize him when he made himself known. Ada was the first to call out to him. Deku, what are you doing here? The rest of the class looked over to see the symbol of peace approach them. Catching some sunshine while I can, he said. It's such a beautiful day out here, isn't it? Yeah, I remember when this was a landfill, Jiraiya commented. I'm glad the city finally cleaned it up. Uraraka stole a glance at Midoriya, who smiled back at her. It is a relief, Deku said. Anyway, I won't be getting in your way or anything, so enjoy your day, he said. You won't be sticking around, Shoji asked. No, besides, today's your day. You all passed your finals and survived the first term of your second year. You don't need to have someone shadowing you, Deku insisted. Are you sure? 𝐒𝐴 asked. Deku smiled. Enjoy yourselves. I'll catch you all later, he said. He turned and walked off before they could press him even further. With Deku gone, the students continued setting up their day out. Ada helped with setting the blankets and chairs while Mina and Shoji got the umbrellas set up. Midoriya helped set the coolers down while Jiraiya set up her Bluetooth speaker on one of them. After a few minutes, their spot was officially theirs. All right, everyone, please be aware that we are still representing UA, and we still have a reputation to uphold. He should be orderly and respect our fellow beachgoers, Ada proclaimed. Oh, dude, you're doing your class rep voice again, 𝗧𝗍 pointed out. The former class rep paused for a moment. He sighed. I forget. 𝐒𝐴 had a smile on her face as a giggle escaped her lips. Regardless, we do need to be respectful. We are still heroes in training. Be safe, everyone, and have fun. The class cheered in response, and some of them ran off to the shoreline, leaving Midoriya, Uraraka, and 𝐒𝐴 behind at the side. While the everything hero set up her chair, Uraraka nudged her boyfriend. You didn't want to tell them. she asked. "Nah, they don't need to," Midoriya said. "Tell them." 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐵 wondered. "Tell them what?" "That it was Deku who cleaned up the beach last year," Uraraka said. "Really? All by yourself?" 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐵 wondered. Midoriya nodded. "Was it community service or something?" "No, it was training. It's a long story, but I needed to work out my whole body to utilize my quirk properly," the young successor said. 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐵 hid a chuckle that slipped out. "Did it work?" "Nope. But hey, I killed 10 months and got a great workout out of it. I'd say it was worth it," Midoriya said with a smile. 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐵 smiled and slipped on her sunglasses. "Behave, you two. As the only out couple in the class, I expect the both of you to know your limits when in public," she said. "You sound like a mom, 𝐴𝐿 Uraraka said with a smile on her face. She and Midoriya turned and walked away as the everything hero shooed them away. When the couple made it to the shore, they watched their classmates enjoy themselves. Mina and Tsu were swimming pretty far from them, earning some stern remarks from Ada, who feared that a high tide would sweep them away. Kirishima, Hagakure, and Shoji were all busy burying Shinso under the sand. The rest of the class were either wandering up and down the coast or enjoying the waves crashing near the shore. Midoriya wrapped his arm around Uraraka's waist and smiled. "What a beautiful day," he muttered. The anti-gravity hero pecked her boyfriend on the cheek. "Thanks for suggesting this place, Deku. It's great to see everyone relaxing out here," she said. "And then there's Kaken." The couple turned to see Bakugo burying Shiro in the sand nearby. He wasn't buried laying down like Shinso was. Instead, he was buried up to his head with a bucket on his head. The bucket had All Might's face on it and a sticky note on it that said, "I am buried in the sand." The explosive hero was too busy laughing and taking pictures of him to notice the young couple staring at him. Uraraka smiled. "You're getting stronger, Deku. You're getting to 55% now," she asked. Midoriya nodded. "The vestiges are saying that another quirk will be coming soon. The sooner I fully master one for all, the sooner I can take the fight to Shigaraki," he said. "But hey, you're getting stronger too. I saw your fight with 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐵." The anti-gravity hero smiled. "She's really good with her weapons. I want to learn about them so the next fight can be a little more even," she said. "You kidding me? Ochako, you're more nimble than she is. You put more hand-to-hand martial arts into your fighting style while she works on melee weapons. I'd say things are pretty even," he said. "Thanks, Deku. I'm signing up for that boot camp next month. It'll be interesting to train with your older self." "Huh?" she wondered. Midoriya nodded. "I think I will too. Maybe he can give me some insight on the remaining quirks." 12 years later, and I'm sure he's mastered them all, he said, as the two continued to talk. Neither was aware that Deku was listening in with enhanced hearing. The future symbol of peace was standing at the railing overlooking the beach, and when he heard Midoriya talk about the other quirks, he sighed. He shut off his quirk and leaned onto the railing. As the symbol of peace looked out on the beach, he found a memory creeping in. The sun and all the people disappeared, leaving him standing at the edge of the pier. He wore a suit vest and white-collared dress shirt underneath. He didn't wear his signature red boots with his black slacks. He also didn't feel the same as when he did during his days at UA. He remembered Uraraka being there, and Bakugo, with 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐵 and Mirio Tagata behind him. The clouds rolled in as if a storm was approaching, and in a way, it was. He remembered his heart clenching in his chest. He could still feel his blood rushing under his skin. He remembered the cold winds brushing against his bare skin, doing nothing to shake him from his thoughts. Deku shut his eyes as he heard his younger self scream in pain. The scream echoed in his head as the memory quickly faded, bringing him back to the sounds of cheering and laughter on a sunny day. His phone started to buzz in his pocket. Quickly fishing it out, the hero answered. "Hello, Deku, right? We have an emergency. A truck crashed into an office building in Isuwa City. Eyewitnesses saw several men in suits fleeing the area before being apprehended by Fat Gum. I was told you would want to take this because of their affiliation with the Discorder organization," the voice said. "That's right. When did this happen?" "Just a few moments ago. We haven't touched the truck yet." "Excellent. I'll be there soon." "Thank you, hero." The caller hung up. As Deku pocketed his phone, he looked up to see everyone still enjoying themselves. He saw that a little girl lost her balloon near the coastline. He didn't have to do anything as Midoriya leaped into the air and used float to grab the balloon before returning to Earth. With her prize back in her hands, the little girl hugged Midoriya before running off. Deku smiled as another memory surfaced. This time, he and Ochako, as grown-ups, were walking the beach with Yuri and Koda walking side by side. The two were just accepted to UA, so he took them to the beach to show them where his starting line was. "Never forget your origins, kids. Pretty soon, you'll soar higher and farther than us, and I can't wait to see you become great heroes," he told them. As the memory faded, Deku could see Midoriya and Uraraka looking right at him. The future symbol of peace raised his arm, earning a response from the young heroes. With the message received, Deku left the beach parking lot. Isuwa City wasn't too far of a commute for Deku. Aside from his quick detour to the Heights Alliance to grab his hero uniform, it took little time to reach the outskirts of the city. Of course, as a hero, he didn't make a beeline straight there. He stopped at several villages and neighborhoods and lent a hand if he saw villain activity on his way over or if someone needed some help with something else. He helped 2 young teenagers get to the roofs of their houses to fix something, snatched a getaway car full of 2-bit criminals, and managed to help lift an I-beam for a construction crew. Of course, he would always keep it quick and not stick around for any pictures or answer any questions. As he moved toward the city, he noticed some significant changes. Several buildings along the way were boarded up and fenced off from the public. Graffiti depicting the symbol of the Paranormal Liberation Front and the League of Villains would line their walls. He spotted one building with several open windows, and through them you could see the faint glow of a trash can fire. Deku recognized some of these buildings. They used to be hero agencies before they shut down due to their heroes retiring. With society turning its back on a majority of heroes, the pros had no choice but to disappear from the public so they could weather the storm. Tamura Shigaraki and 𝗬𝗲𝗿 successfully brought a hurricane into their lives, and the eye was nowhere in sight. The symbol of peace sighed as he passed over an abandoned building and reached his destination, the shopping plaza in the middle of Eshua City. The young symbol of peace touched down in the plaza where there weren't that many people around. Stepping into the public eye, the world saw Deku for the first time, and like he had hoped, he caught no one's attention. Deku checked his phone and found a message he had received during his flight over. It was an address to where Tsukachi and other law enforcement were waiting. Turning on a heel, Deku made his way over to the site. Luckily for him, the site wasn't too far away. The crowds of people that would normally populate the plaza were thin enough for him to navigate without any issues. However, some people pointed and gawked at him as he walked, making him feel a little self-conscious. Of course, these looks were not of awe. One of the civilians walked up to him and stopped him in his tracks. "We don't need you here, hero," the man yelled in his face. "You probably caused this so you can look good saving us." A woman yelled behind the young hero. "You're all liars. Get lost, Zero. Why don't you just retire and save us all the pain?" As the outcries from the people continued, Deku sighed and continued his journey. "This is only the past. My past. Everything changes in 2 years," he thinks to himself. Deku powered through the chaos and reached the office building. Most of the structure remained intact, except for the front door. The double glass doors that revealed the lobby was smashed by the box truck. Police officers surrounded the scene, keeping reporters and civilians away from the wreckage. As he got closer, the symbol of peace spotted a very familiar large, orange blob. Deku leaped into the air and used float to make it to the police barricade. He flashed his hero ID to the officer, and he motioned the young hero to continue through, earning some protests from the civilians. He touched down behind Fat Gum and pocketed his ID. He tapped the BMI hero and cleared his throat. "Fat Gum, it's been forever." The large hero turned with a confused look on his face. He looked down at Deku, who was flashing his bright smile. "Ooh, sorry, but have we met?" he wondered. Deku smirked at the BMI hero. "The Shy Hasekai raid, remember? I was the little green guy up at the front," he said. Fat Gum scrunched his brows together, trying to remember the raid. Deku's smirk stayed as he watched the hero's right hand wiggling around, showing that he was piecing it all together. Finally, the light bulb in his head switched on. "Deku, oh my god, I completely forgot about you. It's the hair, isn't it?" Deku brushed his hair back in emphasis. "Well, you aren't that flashy compared to your friends. But still, HEYYYY. The grin that Deku wore grew bigger. "But you're older. How? Time travel. I'm that Deku from 12 years in the future," he explained. "Don't ask how I got here, though, because I got no clue." Fat Gum's eyes widened. He turned to Tsukachi, who nodded to the large hero. That's amazing, actually. 12 years, huh? You really changed, huh? I still can't out-eat you, though," he said. "Wah." Deku shook his head. "Sorry, I'm mixing you in the future, Fat Gum." "My bad." Fat Gum snapped out of it. "Anyway, Detective Tsukachi called me in to help out since you nabbed some guys that I've been tracking for a while," Deku explained. "Thanks for that, by the way." Fat Gum shrugged. "Right place in the right time, right?" he asked. Deku nodded. "Detective." Tsukachi nodded. "Well, it's all here, really. The truck hasn't moved an inch." The criminals all bailed from the cabin and ran straight into Fat Gum. Once the police were called, they were taken into custody. He broke down the situation. "Any motive?" Deku asked the both of them. "Nada. They clammed up as soon as their asses hit the pavement," Fat Gum said. "Their phones were already smashed when they crashed." "Papers. A manifest coming in from a warehouse outside city limits," the detective said. "And get this, the destination was Mike Tower," Fat Gum said. Deku's eyes widened. "Mike Tower? But they were heading in the wrong direction." Fat Gum and Detective Tsukachi nodded. All Might was already made aware of the situation. "The tower was locked down as soon as we sent word in," the detective said, "and it could have been a diversion. We're looking into possible deliveries heading toward the tower, 𝗵𝗃𝗄 said. Deku eyed the truck. So strange that they targeted the tower, but they decided to ram their truck here. The area isn't exactly where the Discorder organization would operate. There are too many hero agencies here, Deku said. There were, 𝗵𝗃𝗄 corrected him. Deku stopped for a moment. He facepalmed so hard, he thought for a moment that he activated one for all. Thankfully, his head was still on his shoulders. Right, I completely forgot. 𝗬𝗲𝗏's video helped shame many heroes into retirement. Deku exclaimed. You forgot. 𝗵𝗃𝗄 wondered. Times changed. In 3 years, everything 𝗬𝗏 and Shigaraki tried to do will be reversed when the next generation of heroes hit the streets, Deku explained. But now the area is ripe for the picking. Little hero traffic plus high-strung anti-hero society equals the perfect cover for any illegal activities on his part. Tsukachi and 𝗵𝗃𝗄 exchanged looks. Well, at least it won't be forever, the BMI hero said. But what about now? Why crash a truck into an office building and bail? It couldn't have been a bomb, right? Deku turned to the truck. They wouldn't risk crashing the truck if they had one in here. The building looks to be pretty strong, so it would have been bad for them to blow themselves up like that accidentally. Deku knocked on the truck. They're villains, not insane. So what's in there? Tsukachi wondered. Deku shrugged. Let's find out. Moving to the back of the truck, Deku grabbed the handle at the bottom. A few police officers rounded behind him with their guns drawn, ready for anything. With 𝗵𝗃𝗄 and Detective Tsukachi ready, the young symbol of peace broke the lock and lifted the door. Once open, they all moved in. There were boxes stacked on top of each other with a sea of foam peanuts on the floor. Flashlights illuminated the rest of the cabin. With the door open, Deku was the first to step inside and grabbed one of the boxes. The box immediately drew his attention to it once he picked it up. It's empty. One of the officers followed him inside the truck. He kicked one of the boxes, and his eyes widened. This one too. One by one, more officers entered the truck and inspected the boxes. Most of them were filled to the brim with foam peanuts, while a few others had other boxes packed inside them. Most of them were labeled with the same crude writing one would find when someone was moving. This doesn't make any sense, Tsukachi said as he shoved some boxes aside. Why would they fill a truck with these things? Deku, however, pushed through the sea of cardboard. He could grab a box or two, shake it close to his ear, and toss it to the ground once he was satisfied with it. This is familiar, I think, he mused. This has happened before. 𝗵𝗃𝗄 asked. Deku nodded. The Chaos King's first assault on society, I think. I was still pretty young when he started, he said, as the young symbol of peace continued to inspect the cabin. He kicked one box away and felt something new. The box had a little weight to it, unlike the others. He picked it up, opened it, and reached inside. Inside was an old-fashioned chess clock. He turned it around and inspected the features. The clock was analog with gold and steel trimming around the face. The body was of rosewood with gold buttons on top. There were steel designs all over, including a steel chaos star in between the two faces. Neither of them was ticking, however. A button was pressed on top of it. Acting on a hunch, Deku pressed the other button, starting the clock all over again. It's my move. Deku looked around the cabin once more before turning his gaze toward the officers. Everyone quiet for a minute, he said. With silence in the truck, Deku activated his enhanced hearing. He shortened his range while focusing on the heartbeats of everyone inside the truck. He counted 6, excluding himself. There were only 5 officers inside the truck with him. Deku turned to where he heard the 6th heartbeat. It was the far wall where there was a clear area, free from any boxes. The young symbol of peace felt his heart drop as he turned to the police officers. Get out. Their response was immediate as they jumped out. As they did, Deku turned to find that a grotesque monster filled the space at the back of the cabin. A winged 𝗚𝗄 had appeared with dark, leathery skin and piercing yellow eyes. Its 2 claws were sharpened to a fatal point. The beast was slim, except for the protruding gut at the base of its stomach. As soon as it appeared, the beast burst through the truck, knocking Deku to the ground. Most of the police and the civilians nearby ran to cover while the remaining officers drew their guns and fired. The 𝗚𝗚 flew close to the ground and toward a small group of people. It closed its mouth and growled, baring its teeth to the fleeing civilian. Deku noticed right away what it was doing when he saw its fangs started to glow orange. No, he leaped into action and fired his black whip. It wrapped around the 𝗚𝗚's head, and with a mighty pull, Deku yanked the beast away. He let go of the whip and charged forward, raising his knee into the side of its head and smashing it into the ground face first. However, his victory was short-lived when the ground beneath their feet exploded, sending debris and cops into the air. More 𝗚𝗚, emerging from the ground like zombies from the classic pre-Quirk monster movies, started to terrorize the surface. Unlike the 𝗚𝗚 they all were familiar with, these creatures were more streamlike and monstrous. With their focus now shifting to the emerging 𝗚𝗚, the police and the 2 heroes leaped into action. Several officers focused on one 𝗚𝗚 when 𝗵𝗃𝗄 ran interference whenever one of the monsters decided to focus on the civilian. When the 𝗵𝗲 started to slip through his defenses, Deku jumped into the fray to help. The police officer and civilians watched as Deku vanished in the blink of an eye and reappeared to deliver a strike against the monsters. In one flash, one of the civilians could only watch with a hanging jaw as the symbol of peace jammed his elbow into the gut of a winged 𝗵𝗲, stopping it from trying to take people away. As Deku ran interference, 𝗵𝗃 smiled as he absorbed a strike from a 𝗵𝗲. "Damn, he's good," he complimented. 𝗏𝗏𝗏 stole a glance at the symbol of peace and nodded. "Reminds me of All Might back in the good old days," he said as he fired his gun at the brain of one of the 𝗵𝗲. As the monster blocked the bullets, Deku noticed that the 𝗵𝗲 were starting to attack in groups. The first 𝗵𝗲 with the protruding stomach flew toward a group of people with two other 𝗵𝗲 flying with it. A serpent-type 𝗵𝗲 charged at the officers trying to reach the civilians first. In a flash, Deku disappeared, grabbed the serpent 𝗵𝗲 by its tail, and swung it at the flying monsters, knocking two of them away with a single strike. He threw away the serpent 𝗵𝗲 and watched as the last 𝗵𝗲's jaw glowed and it spit out a massive fireball. Deku's eyes widened. In the blink of an eye, he grabbed the civilians that were in its direct path and shielded them with his back. The fireball exploded on his back, spreading small flames around him. Thankfully, the fleeing civilians weren't in the splash radius. The flying 𝗵𝗲 flew over the symbol of peace and tried to fly away. With bullets flying above their heads, the fleeing civilians were quick to find cover. 𝗵𝗃 saw Deku's back on fire and rushed to help. He stopped when he saw Deku get back up without an issue. Deku reached up and unbuckled his cape from his suit. With the cape on the ground, the symbol of peace proceeded to stomp out the flames. "Are you all okay?" he asked the civilians he saved. One of them nodded. "Why, you saved us?" Deku nodded. "You sound surprised," he said. The civilian didn't answer. Deku looked down and sighed as he watched his cape burn. "This thing is supposed to be stronger than napalm," he said. "And in napalm?" Deku nodded. "Get to cover, now." As the civilians ran, Deku turned to the fleeing 𝗵𝗲. He ran forward, giving chase to the monster. "You're not getting away," he declared. He jumped onto the roof of a parked car and jumped into the air with great force. He thrusted his arm out and fired his black whip at the creature. The tendrils of black energy latched onto its wings. With its flapping ceased, Deku used float to hold himself and the monster in place. 𝗵𝗃, the police, and the civilians nearby watched as Deku pulled with great force. The 𝗵𝗲 screeched in pain as its wings were torn from its back, bringing the beast back down to the earth. Its wings fell as Deku's black whip released them. The 𝗵𝗲 slammed into the ground face first with its wings falling around it. The police were quick to surround the beast with their guns drawn. 𝗵𝗃 could only stare at the dismembered wings that fell. He looked back up at Deku as he was falling back to the ground. Once he was on the street, the 𝗵𝗲 hero approached the symbol of peace. What was that?" Deku shrugged. "It's not the worst thing these things received," he said. "No, not that," 𝗵𝗃 exclaimed. "Why, you were floating in midair. And those whips." Deku raised a finger to his lips. "I'll explain later, but there are still a few 𝗵𝗲 that slipped away. I'll find them and meet you at the station," he said. 𝗵𝗃 was about to argue, but an explosion down the road stopped him. Civilians were running away from the source while some were wearing support gear and running toward the chaos. Deku sighed and pressed on the armor supporting his jaw. His respirator appeared over his mouth, and he turned away. "Everything will be okay. I won't let them get hurt," he said. With his promise, he disappeared in a blur, leaving a stunned 𝗵𝗃 at the scene. He sighed, and he turned to the fallen 𝗵𝗲. "Right then. Let's clean this up." The remaining 𝗵𝗲 didn't stand a chance when Deku arrived. There were 10 𝗵𝗲 that slipped away from the initial group: 4 bulky 𝗵𝗲, 2 napalm-bellied 𝗵𝗲, a serpent 𝗵𝗲, and 3 high-end 𝗵𝗲. These 𝗵𝗲 were leading the pack through the city, causing as much chaos as they could. The napalm-bellied 𝗵𝗲 spat their fiery loads at the fleeing civilians while the bulkier monsters tossed cars and trucks around like they were nothing. The serpent 𝗵𝗲 weaved through the chaos with his claws ready. The few civilians that charged into the fray with support items were quickly outgunned. The serpent 𝗵𝗲 swung its poisonous claws at them if they got too close. The napalm-bellied creatures spat fire in their path, splitting them up and weakening their combined power. Their assault crumbled as soon as Deku arrived. He slammed on the tail of the serpent 𝗵𝗲 and reached forward with a clawed hand in a flash. With his gauntlets sharpened to a point, Deku plunged his fingers into the beast's brain, causing the creature to shut down instantly. The other 𝗵𝗲 noticed immediately. However, Deku disappeared before they could get an eye on him. One of the high-ends scanned the surrounding area before being body-slammed by the symbol of peace. The 𝗵𝗲 slammed into another high-end, and the two crashed into the side of a building. The civilians at arms stopped their charge and watched as Deku made short work of them. The symbol of peace leaped into the air and jammed his fist into the stomach of one of the napalm-bellied 𝗵𝗲. The creature screeched as its mouth began to glow bright orange. Deku grabbed the monster's face and slammed its jaw shut. The monster tried to spit out the napalm in its stomach, but the gel inside had nowhere to go but back down to its stomach. As its stomach erupted into a fiery blaze, Deku jammed his elbow to the side of its head and threw it at the ground with great force. The Namu erupted as soon as it hit the ground. As Deku landed on the ground, the 4 bulky Namu tried charging at the hero. The symbol of peace backed away and grabbed a street sign. He tore it from the ground and slammed the sign part off of the metal bar. He grabbed the jagged end of it and smoothed it out, creating a makeshift spear. The bulky Namu did not falter, giving Deku exactly what he needed. As the monsters leaped at him, Deku used his makeshift spear to smack them to the side. He pushed through their line and grabbed the burning Namu on the ground. He turned in midair and threw the burning monster at the charging bulky Namu. The bulky Namu caught the burning one, and as it was about to throw it to the side, Deku poured more of one for throughout his body. He readied his spear and threw it with the power of a pre-quirked javelin champion. The spear pierced through the napalm Namu's stomach and pierced through the bulky Namu and its comrades behind it. The spear carried enough flaming gel to pierce through all 4 monsters before being embedded into the head of a hyena. The hyena collapsed as its brain was engulfed in flames. The 4 bulky Namu all looked at the burning wounds they received before they collapsed. They couldn't regenerate as enough of the napalm Namu's gel coated their wounds and burned them from the inside. Deku turned to the remaining Namu, 2 hyenas and the remaining napalm-bellied Namu. "That's 7, right?" One of the hyenas approached him. The Namu was slim but very powerful, with a skull head and protruding brain. Its claws were glowing green and sharpened to lethal points. "Who are you?" it asked in a raspy, male voice. Deku smiled. "I'm the guy who slays monsters," he said. He charged at them with clenched fists. One of the hyenas barely registered Deku's speed before its face was smashed in by a powerful fist. The symbol of peace didn't slow down as he leaped into the air and grabbed the napalm-bellied Namu by its leg and slammed into the ground like a ragdoll. With a lovely imprint of the monster embedded into the street, Deku threw the dazed monster at the remaining hyena. The monster barely caught the napalm-bellied Namu before Deku came and kicked it square in the chest, sending the 2 flying through the air. The hyena scrambled to its feet, growled at the hero, and charged with its claws ready. Deku smiled as he dodged swipe after swipe. With danger sense guiding him, the Namu could not touch him. The hyena growled in frustration as it continued to miss each swipe, causing its attacks to become more erratic with each swipe. "Stand still, you fake hero," the Namu boomed. Deku didn't stop. "Society doesn't need you. The world doesn't need heroes anymore. You're obsolete," it continued. "That's where you're wrong, beast." Deku grabbed both of the Namu's arms and held them apart. His grip clamped on its arms, threatening to break the bones within. "So long as there is one person in the world in need of a hero," Deku headbutted the beast, sending it staggering backward. "I will not abandon them." With a powerful rising uppercut, Deku lifted the beast off the ground. He leaped into the air with it and delivered a powerful axe kick on the brain. The impact sent a shockwave throughout the monster's body, shutting it down as it slumped on the ground. Deku stood over the lifeless Namu. He retracted his respirator and sighed. "That's too many Namu for a coincidence. He better not be doing what I think he's doing," he muttered. Using his speed, Deku vanished and extinguished the fires however he could. He buried the clumps of burning napalm and the burning Namu into the ground. He retrieved the remaining beasts and ran toward the local police station. Along the way, he made sure every single Namu was down for good, a process he was glad no one saw. When he arrived at the police station, Deku dropped off the bodies of the monsters. There were a few heroes at the station, including Fat Gum. When they saw Deku drop them off, the future symbol of peace was bombarded with questions. Before he could answer them, the police commissioner pulled him aside and directed him to an empty interrogation room. The questions were long and were difficult to answer. It took several hours for the police to get what they needed from Deku, and when they did, the young hero was free to go. The heroes, including Fat Gum, didn't wait around for an explanation from Deku. However, before he left, Deku asked that a specialist crew extinguish the fires from the napalm-bellied Namu. He led the team to the buried monsters and eventually put out the fires. Unfortunately for him, his cape received too much chemical damage to be saved. With his cape in tatters, Deku left the city in a flash, heading back to Ua in the future. The Toshinori Hero Agency, founded by Deku and Urabi after they graduated from UA, the facility housed 4 pro heroes: the number 1 hero, the number 3, the number 6, and the number 7. Deku and Dynamite led the agency's criminal investigations and combat divisions, responding to more public crises where heavy hitters were needed. While Urabi was also a combat hero, she was also head of the support and rescue operations. Anti-gravity was a useful tool in many disaster situations. And finally, Creedy led the more logistical members of the agency. Her genius intellect helped the agency decipher the Chaos King's more complex illegal activity. Despite being a hero agency, and by default, working on their own, they cooperated more than any other hero agency. Deku and 𝗓𝗏𝗵𝐵 coordinated with other heroes in stopping the Chaos King's more destructive activity. When it came to sharing intel regarding the Discorder organization, 𝐒𝐽𝐫 passed information around, keeping many heroes and law enforcement personnel in the loop. Inside Deku's office was the number 6 pro hero, 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏. She sat at his desk, a fine rosewood partner desk with gold handles with the drawers. A green mat covered the desk, and several pictures were facing the young hero. The pictures ranged from Deku's days at UA, his summer vacation at I-Island after All Might and Deku defeated 𝗂𝗏𝗏, a few pictures from his time at Naboo Island, and even some relaxed shots of his time off with members of the class. One picture was bigger than the others. The biggest picture on Deku's desk was one of him, All Might, Uraraka, and even 𝗵𝘃𝗀𝐻, all flexing at Takoba Beach. It was a day that would be forever ingrained in their minds. It was their last picture before All for One and Tamura Shigaraki attacked Tokyo 2 weeks later. 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 sighed as she glanced at the picture before returning her attention to the stacks of paperwork on Deku's desk. While most of the papers were letters of thanks, others were copies of police reports of the jobs he had taken. There were letters from sponsors for the Tokyo Relief Fund, letters from the head of the said fund, and a few requests from different organizations to sponsor them. All of that didn't include the bills. It had been weeks since Deku and the Chaos King disappeared, and nobody was coming close to finding them. The Discorder organization grew quiet when their boss disappeared, and without the symbol of peace, 𝗓𝗏𝗵𝗵 and a few other heroes had to pick up the slack, including 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏. The people noticed that Deku was missing right away, and it was beginning to take a toll on the agency. As she combed through the endless stack of papers on Deku's desk, the intercom in the office buzzed. 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏, you have a visitor, the male voice on the other end said. It's Pinky. 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏's face lit up as she set the papers down. Great. Where is she? She asked. The door to Deku's office opened, and Pinky entered the room. Her costume didn't change from her days at UA, except for the jacket, which she wore more often now. Her hair was significantly shorter than during her UA days. Mina wrapped her left hand in training bandages. She wore a utility belt that hung loosely on her waist. When she spotted her anti-gravity best friend, she threw her arms wide open. Achako, Mina, so good to see you. The two embraced in a hug. I didn't know you were back in the country. How was Egypt? The acid-throwing hero sighed. Too hot. It turns out the Chaos King did have a sponsor in the region, the last remnants of the PLF, she said. You're kidding. Pinky shook her head. They were flying the flag, and they had a portrait of Shigaraki. We stopped them, no problem, but I'm worried that maybe there's more out there, she confessed. 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 nodded. The sooner we shut down the Discorders, the better, she said. I know 𝗷𝗄𝗄 is cracking that hard drives we nabbed from the Chaos King with the others right now. Yeah, I heard. How are you holding up? With Midori being gone for so long, Pinky wondered. Well, I'm not used to the house being quiet. I sent Eri and Kota to Mandalay in the Beast's Forest for safety, she said. I don't want them to get hurt. Again, Pinky nodded and looked past 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 to look at a picture of Deku and Eri posing for a picture up on the wall. Achako, I can't say sorry enough for what happened. It wasn't your fault, 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 said. When we find the Chaos King, however, I think he'll be the one saying sorry. Pinky smiled. Hey, let's get you out of here. It would be best if you had a walk. And I need to shake off that turbulence, she said. The anti-gravity girl nodded. I'll get changed and ask if 𝗷𝗄𝗄 wants to join us, she said. She's been working twice as hard. Pinky nodded. The two left the room, and 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 locked the door behind her. 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 was hard at work, breaking through the Chaos King's security on the hard drives. Her office wasn't too different from Deku's. With the same partner desk as he got, she had many elements from her old home all over. She had many Russian dolls on a bookshelf on the left side of the room. Many of them had depictions of her old classmates in them. As a joke, she put a small 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 doll lying face down in front of a large Deku doll and sent the couple a picture of it. As a result, the two sent pictures of their middle fingers raised at her. The photos were printed, framed, and placed on the shelf next to the two dolls. She and 𝗓𝗏𝗵𝗏 were proud of her little prank. It was one of the few times the two bonded over something. Besides the dolls, there were also pictures from UA hung on the walls. The photos ranged from a few action shots during training to band practice and even a picture of her hugging Midnight after a lesson with the R-rated hero. A replica of Midnight's mask was framed with a small plaque that read, Midnight, the mighty hero. Her desk had a few trinkets that the everything hero made out of boredom. Most were dolls, some were little statues, mini robot spiders, and even a small drone with a helmet next to it. 𝗬𝗏𝗧𝗏 sat at her desk with her computer on with one of the hard drives plugged in. She sighed as she focused on her monitor. Come on, please work, she muttered as she pressed a button to execute another attempt. As she watched the computer do what it was supposed to, 𝐒𝐽𝐽 leaned back into her chair and pinched the bridge of her nose. She reached over to the office phone she had and dialed a number. "This is taking too long," she muttered. She waited a moment before she got an answer. "Hello, Abi? Hey, sorry, I hope you're not too busy," 𝐒𝐽𝐽 said. "It's a slow day, thankfully. What's going on? You sound tired." 𝐒𝐽𝐽 nodded. "It's this stupid drive we grabbed from the Chaos King. I've been running program after program, and they keep crashing," she said. "Sounds serious. Are you using a good password recovery tool?" "That was the first thing I used," she said. "Brute force won't cut it either, I imagine. I think I have something you can use, though you would need to use a computer you have no intention of using ever again," she said. "You have something from the old days?" She wondered. "Sort of. It's an old program I used to break into the UA servers back before we became friends. I'll need to give you a hard copy of it, though, so it'll take a while," she admitted. "You still have that?" "I thought you dumped everything after graduating from UA," 𝐒𝐽𝐽 said. "I got bored one night and rewrote most of the program." "The core of it is still the same," Abigail said. 𝐒𝐽𝐽 nodded. "Let me know when you can send it. We'll catch up." "I'd love that. Gotta go." Abigail cut the line immediately, leaving the everything hero to her business. 𝐒𝐽𝐽 sat back in her seat and watched as the program failed to break through the Chaos King's firewall. She groaned and started to shut everything down. As she did, her door opened, and the two young heroines entered the room. "𝐴𝐽𝐿, 𝗵𝗃𝗲 exclaimed. 𝗂𝐽𝐽 looked up with tired eyes, and a life filled her face as soon as she recognized her. "Mina, I didn't you were back in town." "Just got back. We're going on a coffee run. You wanna come?" 𝗂𝐽𝐽's smile got wider. "Give me a minute to shut everything down." "I'm right behind you," she said. 𝗂𝐽𝐽 smiled as she turned to walk out of the room, but she stopped and eyed her bookshelf. She saw the Russian dolls and chuckled. "You're a nerd for framing those," she exclaimed. 𝗂𝐽𝐽 shrugged. "You're surprised." 𝗂𝐽𝐽 shook her head. 𝗂𝐽𝐽 finished wrapping up her work, grabbed her civilian clothes from a rack behind her, and shooed the anti-gravity hero out. "I gotta change." "Shoo." 𝗂𝐽𝐽 left, leaving the everything hero to change in peace. Once they left the agency, the trio walked through the streets of 𝗵𝘃𝗮. The agency was in the inner city area, not far from the UA campus. While not as impressive as Might Tower, the Toshinori Hero Agency was still a beautiful building consisting of mostly glass panes and steel, allowing anyone walking by to see what the residents were doing. On one occasion, civilians watched as Deku threw a water balloon at Dynamite as he was coming out of the bathroom with 𝗂𝐽𝐽 sneaking up behind him. While their antics were seen as childlike and not fitting the profile of the #1 hero, it also showed that they were just as human as everyone else. They didn't pretend to be gods. The trio of heroes made their way to a coffee shop not far from the agency. The shop was small and humble with a regular crowd of customers. They were recognized as pros as soon as they arrived, but instead of using their fame to slip through, they stood in the back of the line. "Grabbed a picture of it, but I couldn't focus on it before we got jumped," 𝗵𝗃𝗲 said. "This guy with a massive, rocky body towered over us and swung at us like bugs. He didn't like the acid I threw at him, but that didn't stop him from causing a lot of damage." "And your partner?" 𝗂𝐽𝐽 asked, cawed when the guy showed up. "For someone with an armor-type quirk, he went down quick," the acid-throwing hero said. "Well, the armor doesn't guarantee strength, right?" 𝗂𝐽𝐽 wondered. "That's what I thought," 𝗵𝗃𝗲 exclaimed. "But no, poor guy got his first internship, and he gets the sand knocked into him. With some more training, he'll definitely be a heavy hitter in the region. Maybe if Midoriya held training classes, he could definitely get the help he needs," 𝗂𝐽𝐽 suggested. 𝗂𝐽𝐽 nodded. As they got closer to the front of the line, 𝗂𝐽𝐽's phone began to ring. 𝗂𝐽𝐽 and 𝗵𝗃𝗲 signed some papers given to them as the everything hero answered. "Hello, Yaoyorozu. Is your Araka with you?" Abigail Winters exclaimed. "Yeah, we're here. Mina's here too. What's going on? Come to Hatsum's lab. We're going to be waiting for you guys." "I think we have a solution to your problem," she said. "The hard drives?" 𝗂𝐽𝐽 asked. "No, Midoriya. I think we have a lead." 𝗂𝐽𝐽 hung up the phone and eyed her friends. 𝗂𝐽𝐽 and 𝗵𝗃𝗲 both heard the call, and with a nod, they quickly took their orders and left as soon as they got their coffee. After graduating from UA, May Hatsum interned with SHIELD Support Technologies, headed by the young Melissa SHIELD. Their time together proved fruitful as the young inventor climbed her way to the top, inventing alongside renowned support engineers. After 8 years, May bid the company a fond farewell and started her own support business. Tatsu Technologies produced much imaginative support gear, ranging from capture gear to quirk-enhanced gear and surveillance technology. While roughly 4 years old, May did not essentially work in the main building, designing support gear with other inventors she had trained. Instead, she bought an old auto repair garage and improved it so she could design and test in peace. When the trio arrived at the lab, they were surprised to see a young woman with short, silver hair standing in front of the building. She wore a simple white lab coat with goggles hanging on her neck. Her arms were dressed with armored gauntlets, and underneath her coat was a padded shirt with a 𝐒𝐩𝐢𝐳 on it. Pinky ran toward the young woman. "ABI," she called out. "Mina, so good to see you again." The acid-throwing hero tackled her in a hug. 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐵 and 𝗂𝐵 closed in as Pinky let Abigail down. "Girls, thank you for coming on short notice. You sounded urgent on the phone." "Thankfully, we didn't have to wait long for our coffee before heading here," 𝐒𝐻𝐢𝐵 said. Abigail nodded. "Come inside. May should be done right about." An explosion rattled the building, startling the three heroes. Abigail, however, was unfazed by the event. "Now, come on then." The silver-haired inventor opened the door to the lab and led them through a small hallway outlined in steel. They entered through another door and found the whole lab engulfed in black smoke. Abigail flipped a switch, and several fans roared to life, dispersing the smoke. As the smoke cleared, they saw an entire lab in shambles, and 𝗵𝗃 slammed into a wall, covered in soot. The young inventor cracked open her eyes to see Abigail and the three heroes behind her. Immediately, a smile formed as May launched forward. "It's about time. It's a shock that you didn't go into the bomb-making business," Abigail said as she dusted the soot off of May. "Bombs aren't as fun to make as my babies, mind you," May said. "Boo, what it looks like I'm gonna have to shelve those hover skates. Anti-gravity servos with the wrong propulsion system can be disastrous. You're making hover skates, but what about your hover souls?" 𝗂𝐵 wondered. "Too clunky. I want them to be used out in the field by heroes who aren't very mobile. These new ones are supposed to be sleek, subtle, and fashionable. My electromagnetic souls are in the right area, but I need these to be perfect," May exclaimed. "I was hoping Midoriya would be back by now so he could test these." "Boot." "Yes, we know," 𝗂𝐻𝐢𝐵 interjected. "That's why we're here. You said you have a lead, Abigail?" The silver-haired inventor nodded. "Take a breather, 𝗧𝗵𝗲. You'll need healing when I'm done," she said. "Nah, I'm fine. This ain't my first broken butt bone," May said. Abigail groaned. "I'd force you into a chair, but that would make it worse, wouldn't it?" May smiled. With the soot off her, the heroes got a better look at her outfit. She wore a sleeveless lab coat and a black tank top underneath. She wore gloves, and a pair of goggles were hanging on her belt. She wore dark green cargo pants and boots. Her pink dreadlocks were slightly shorter than her 𝐂𝐢𝐵, coming down to the tops of her ears. Abigail motioned for everyone to follow her to a small space at the far end of the lab. Everyone walked normally while May waddled with a huge grin on her face. When they settled in the small space, May took her place beside Abigail while the heroes sat facing them. "All right, so, about Midoriya," Abigail started. "It's not uncommon for him to go dark, right? I gave his new boots a massive steel upgrade and all, so at first glance, he's still on the job," May said. "Right, except there are a few things that say otherwise. Firstly, the night he disappeared, there was a massive spike of energy around 𝗂𝗏. Some of this energy was recorded before I arrived at UA." "Right?" Abigail asked the heroes. 𝗂𝗏 nodded. "Deku and I were caught in a rift in space and time and sent to another universe," she explained. "And as great as it is that multiverse theory isn't a theory anymore, it raises a serious observation. A new rift may have opened," Abigail concluded. "And it wasn't my fault." "Yet," May commented. Pinky snorted. "Which leads us to another problem. If we can confirm that a rift opened up over the bay, it must be possible that Deku and the Chaos King were caught in its event horizon and sucked in," May said. "So they were sent to another universe. We can use the Janus Stone to get them back then, right?" 𝗂𝗏 wondered. "The Janus Stone," Abigail wondered. "The amulet that Deku and I used to get back. You remember Marinette and Adrien?" 𝗂𝗏 asked her. Abigail stopped to think for a moment. Her eyes widened as she snapped at the heroes. "That gold thing with the ruby, right?" "Oh, that thing. We can't use the Janus Stone either," May squeezed in. The three heroes gave her a confused look. "Why not?" 𝗂𝗏 asked. Instead of answering directly, Abigail turned their attention to the monitor behind them. "About 20 minutes ago, right before I called, I was going through some old recordings I made during my first year at UA. Most of them were training simulation. A few QICD test videos, a stupid reaction video, surveillance footage from inside Project 0P, and so on," she admitted. 𝗂𝗏's eyes widened. Wait, surveillance footage?" Abigail nodded. "You guys didn't sneak into my robot without me knowing. I saw you guys coming a mile away," she admitted with her cheeks turning a light pink. "But that means," Abigail smiled. "They looked nice, by the way. Not as big as I thought, though that may have been your costume causing them to appear." 𝗂𝗏 raised her hand and looked away. We're talking about this later." The healing hero nodded. "Anyway, I was going through those old videos when something just popped up." "What do you mean, popped up?" 𝗂𝗏 wondered. Abigail pulled out her phone and swiped up toward the monitor. A video popped up of ground beta being used. The urban playground they used during the good old days brought back so many memories for everyone in the room. There were obvious signs of destruction, suggesting training in progress. A second later, they all saw why Abigail called them in. The camera shook, and a cloud of dust suddenly appeared. The girls watched as a young Izuku Midoriya leaped in and out of the shot with his focus on the ground. As soon as Midoriya exited the frame, the video slowed down as another blur entered the shot. Thanks to the slow-mo, they all saw who it was, an older Izuku Midoriya clad in villanesque clothing. Gravity's eyes widened. Abigail turned to the three pros. Does anyone here remember the Class 2 final exam?